pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And can you have the record show that all 7 commissioners are present? Any correspondence? None? We'll move right into the city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I know that I mentioned the Munis financial software and try to give you an update at each meeting, but I'm going to just give you a little idea of what we've been doing since 2015, because this is certainly a major part of the processes here that we've been working on. So the timeline of our Munis module rollout, in November, we signed a contract for the server software implementation and installation. A year later, November 2016, we began with the general ledger and accounts payable. Those modules went live. So during that 1 year, we were training and getting the staff up to speed. Part of that time, we were in the trailers, then we moved into this building. April 2017, we started with the payroll module. That went live. And we subsequently left using ADP, which the city had been doing for many years. That saved us money with ADP. The employee self-service was introduced as part of the payroll to facilitate time off requests, personal time off accruals, and to monitor timesheets. So now staff can actually go into the computer and look and see what they have accrued and what they've also taken. In November of 2017, we started using the budget capabilities. Mr. Dukes was certainly instrumental in that, and I think in the 2 years since we've been rolling out the budget in the new format, providing greater transparency, not only for you, the commissioners, but for the public. We now have everything online and on the website. April 2018, we started with utility billing, general billing, and accounts receivable. We went live with the citizen self-service that was implemented to replace the previous online payment system and allows payments for all utility billing accounts and general billing invoices. November 2018, the budgeting capabilities were introduced citywide, so now all staff is using that. And this past May, we went live with business licensing and permitting and inspections. That also includes complaints and violations that are up and running as well. So what do we have left to do? We have property tax that we're currently in the last stages of implementation. We're expected to go live on June 26th, just in a few weeks, and we'll be generating the 2020 billing at that time, as well as the citizen self-service expansion. And those dates, we have July, hopefully by August 1st, everyone will be able to see their property tax, their parcels, business licenses, and permits and inspections as well, so they'll be online. Our folks have better and quicker access to more accurate information, as well as the public. So we're moving along with that. I wanted to give you an encapsulated version of what we've been doing, and certainly in the last almost 4 years. Today, we have Big Belly solar-powered receptacles being installed. That'll hopefully happen today and tomorrow. We have a total of 18 Big Bellies, with 14 being single stations, 2 being double stations. The six single stations will be along the first block of Wilmington Avenue, 6 single stations along the second block of Baltimore Avenue, 2 single stations in Grove Park, and 2 double stations in Grove Park. The double stations have 1 unit for trash and 1 unit for recycling. And these will replace city cans located in the areas mentioned at a cost of approximately $134,000 spread out over 5 years. Mr. Miller is currently attempting to receive grants for some or if not all of this. The boardwalk,
Sharon, just real quick, did you say those are solar powered?
they are
They're
solar powered.
And are they composting as well, or just solar powered?
Solar powered.
And do they compost
Yes,
the garbage
they
as
smash
well?
everything
Yeah.
down.
Compacting.
Compact, not compost. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate it. That's awesome.
The shower tower conversions are being worked on, and they will be complete by the end of this week. The utility rate working group presentation to the commissioners and to the public is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, June 27th, 9 a.m. We've been changing this date back and forth, but hopefully we'll get a consensus for that date, Thursday, June 27th, 9 a.m. We're just awaiting for responses from the group. The drawbridge, work on the Canal drawbridge continues. Over the next 2 weeks, the contractor will be constructing paint containment and performing concrete repairs. Construction updates will be posted on the website and also social media, so we have a line on that. The city has installed 2 new stop signs, the intersection of Henlopen Avenue and Easton Streets. The signs were added to provide safety to the busy route of this intersection. Stormwater sampling, the staff will be meeting with GHD on June 19th next week to develop a sampling protocol for the stormwater to be done, stormwater sampling to be done later this summer. And this is a follow-up to what we talked about last year with when the initial sampling was done, hopefully to identify sources of bacteria. The work is being paid partially through the Surface Water Matching Planning Grant. It's a $55,000 grant, which the city is paying $27,500, half of that for. And this past April, I was fortunate to be asked to participate with some of my colleagues on a panel interviewing graduate students at University of Delaware. These folks were interested in local government positions when they graduate, either this year or next year. And this is unlike Evan's role as a ICMA or an International City County Managers Association fellow. These are University of Delaware students who were interviewing for summer positions to fulfill their curriculum requirements. We were able to place all of those folks who were interviewed. I would have taken any one of them. We're very fortunate to have Jason Wardrop and Simone Atkins here with us. They'll be working from today, June 10th, through August 16th. And Jason will be assigned to Kevin, Simone assigned to Evan, and their responsibilities will be working in stormwater, various public works projects, handicapped access and parking spaces. And we're very happy to have the best of the bunch that we interviewed. So, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome aboard.
Pickleball lines have been painted on 2 of the 4 courts at Deauville Beach. Pickleball, as you may know, has become a very popular activity over the last 10 years. And these were constructed, actually placed last week by a gentleman who came forward who's very experienced in painting the lines. So the tennis courts have been retrofitted to accommodate pickleball players, 2 out of the 4. This similar work has been done in Lewis and surrounding communities and also in private tennis clubs. So Tim Bamforth reported over the weekend. Sunday wasn't a great day, but Saturday certainly there were both tennis players and pickleball players, and everyone seems to be working together for that.
Sharon, one quick question. Is it, I think that one of the tennis players had told me that we're going to allow pickleball only after noon and tennis in the morning. Is that the new schedule? If you don't mind clarifying that.
Yeah, so that's correct.
Okay.
The tennis players for many years have been playing on weekends in the morning hours.
Okay.
Pickleball players were very conciliatory and saying, okay, we'll play in the heat of the day afternoon.
Okay.
12 on weekends, but also during the week, they have availability to play in the morning and all day, the
Okay.
pickleball players.
Okay.
So that was the consensus. That was, it was a extremely conciliatory meeting.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that fireworks will be held here on July 3rd, the day before July 4th. So we'll be giving more updates on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
I just have a real quick one on the Munis update, which, thank you for doing that. It really kind of pulls it all together as to what's been going on since 2015. Have you been able to, or do you have a sense for whether or not there's particular improved productivity within the city staff?
Well, certainly, there's efficiency and productivity, yes. I mean, I welcome you to ask any of the folks downstairs in the finance department how they were doing it before and the process now with Munis. It's certainly much more efficient, it's faster, and it provides our staff with the ability to multitask and do other tasks that they need to within that department.
And the reason I ask is that I think that's an obvious and well-deserved congratulations to the city manager for introducing all of these new opportunities for improved productivity. So I give everybody credit for doing that. The second question I have is on the solar-powered introduction. Will there be a way at some point to on the big bellies, will there be a way to determine if we're either saving money or improving productivity or redirecting something? I don't know, since it's going to be new.
Yeah, so we're actually, as it was pointed out, we're compacting, and we'll be able to not necessarily quantify what's compacted, but I think from the staff in the Public Works Department, just going there and emptying that, and we'll have to see what the turnaround time is. But I know in implementation in the previous community where I worked, it was definitely more efficient and productive.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
And I'd like to pass on compliments I received over the weekend about the cleanliness and renovations of the 3 public restrooms on the boardwalk. So everybody is very pleased, those that have gone in there and seen them and used them. And so at some point, I think it would be worthwhile to get an accounting on what the final tally is for expenses, because we know that what was put in there for the budget hopefully was higher than what we ended up spending.
Certainly, we can do that at your next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Anything else? And the solicitor just told me he has no report. We're going to move right into old business, which is a further discussion of Grove Park Canal Access Project and the path forward for the city. Again, if you remember at the last, one of the last meetings, we had discussed this, and I was mistaken in my, I guess, remembrance of it, that the path forward had been voted on. We had voted last July on allowing, I think it was $20,000 of the city's money to go towards some engineering and reports being done by the landscape architect on the project itself. But at that point in time, we had not taken a vote to move forward with the project itself. It was more of getting together and working on grants and working on the path forward, but not a finalized vote by any means. And so today, based on a couple questions that a couple commissioners had about maintenance and upkeep on the project, some of the city staff is here to talk about that, and I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. You'll recall, Commissioners, that in May, Mr. Matt Spong, who's participating as an observer, I guess, today, but in May, Matt made a very in-depth a presentation for you. And Commissioner Sharp, at the end of that, said, well, this is all well and good, but what does the staff feel about this? And what resources will be needed, and potentially, what do we need to focus on if this comes to fruition? So the team met with me. We met several times. Chief Banks, Liz Lingo, the city arborist, Mr. Williams, our Director of Public Works, Evan, Chris Johnson participated. City Solicitor was there for one of the meetings, and it was interactive. There were many questions and many, I'll say, concerns in the area of just time, staff time. We cleared up the liability issue with the city solicitor, and there were just operational questions in general that needed to be vetted. So just last week, we actually, the team came together and met with Matt Spong again. Matt graciously came here and satisfied, I'll say, 95% of the concerns that staff had. And what I'd like to do is just briefly have the team come up, the chief, Kevin, and Liz, to explain some of the issues that you had and what Matt was able to clear up. So I'll start with you, Chief Banks.
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, General Public. Okay. Well, as I said, the team, we all met several different times, and last week we did meet with Mr. Spong that did help answer some of the questions and concerns that we had. It's important to know we already patrol Grove Park, so it's not going to be any extra manpower hours necessarily to do that. We look throughout the day, different events we have down there, we patrol, and then we check out after hours when the park closes. And I did, anticipation of this meeting, I reached out to Chief Spell and Lewis that has a boat dock a little bit different, Canal, and spoke with him, and there was no issues or concerns from their side on anything like this. And I did also reach out to Captain Doug Messick from DNREC Fish and Wildlife, because they would ultimately have control over the waterways. He was all in favor of it. He knows about the program and looking forward to it moving forward. I asked him if any concerns or issues he thought he may have, and he said no. And I said, what about things we need to know? Maybe like life jackets or life preserver stuff on the dock and things. He said it's not required, but definitely should be there. So again, that was brought up in a meeting with Mr. Spong that I'll go over in a little bit. So the first thing that came to mind after looking at the plans and reviewing them was the safety, obviously, and from the police standpoint. And one thing we looked at was lighting. The type that's planned right now looks like the Ballard type, so low level, that. And my first concern was, is that going to be, it's still going to be dark down there? Again, it put my mind at ease after talking to Matt that, how light do you want it down there at night because this will fall under the preview of that it's a park, so it will be closed at night, is my understanding, unless you guys decide something differently. So you don't want to attract it, but you want to have some lighting that is still safe if somebody should go down there. So I'm pleased with the lighting they put in, and it did currently, I think, show like 6, but he anticipated there would be more of those down there as the project moves forward. So the lighting, but like I said, a lot of that was answered. What was not shown was a video camera. I think anytime we have a new area or park, we ought to take that opportunity to be able to put that up in there to be able to monitor that down at the dispatch center, because it's 24 hours, again, for safety. One thing that wasn't shown, but there is a low-level gate around there and a rampway, is to actually put a door gate at the top of the walkway that can be secured. Obviously, if somebody wants to get in, they still can, but again, it's another deterrent that we can post the hours that the park is closed. And again, I mentioned this earlier, the life safety equipment such as floatable life rings, not required but highly suggested. We looked at signage. The canal cones part of the park, as I mentioned, so we need to put some signage about park hours and again about no smoking down there because it is a park. One thing we looked at was maybe a city ordinance revision there is like a little pier at the end that some areas of the plans called a fishing pier. So to allow fishing, crabbing at that pier or dock, because currently how our city ordinances are written up, it says where you can and cannot fish at. So I would think we might have to tweak the ordinance for that, but just something to put on our radar. And again, we can talk about it, it's on the agenda a little bit later. We would have to put about no smoking because it is a park, but when we get to that, would like to maybe tweak that ordinance a little bit. That would help us for better enforcement. I can go over that later. And the other is just the obvious things is trash receptacles, canoe storage racks. I didn't see that at the beginning, but again, after talking to Matt, he assured me that there was some storage racks because my anticipation was people may, after the canoe or before, need to store them somewhere to walk downtown or back. So just want to make sure we were putting that on our radar, but that looks like it's been taken care of already. So that's all that we had that we saw that might be some extra costs that wasn't first thought about, but he was very receptive of adding that into the process for your attention.
So Chief, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So Chief, the additional costs that are embedded in what you just talked about, would those be borne by the city or the project itself?
Again, we spoke with Matt, and he's going to add it into it. I guess it depends on how your group moves forward and what you give and take, but he can add it into the initial cost right now. So you guys will have a big picture kind of thing.
And I'm going to assume we don't know what those costs are yet, or we do?
We do not.
We do not, okay.
Again, a camera is, today's time is minimal. It's just to hook up. For that would be the cost. And labor, as far as the signage, is minimal. We do have, if it did fall in a city, we have a city sign shop that could do it, but he's going to go ahead and incorporate it in the time in the project.
So much of what we discussed with Matt the other day, some were additional costs that Matt will be adding into the project costs, so the city doesn't, city's not responsible for that from the beginning. But I don't think that they're major costs, but the cost will be added into the budget for the project considerations itself. And we'll get into some of the funding later on.
Okay. On the staffing that you talked about at the beginning of your remarks, and thank you so much for coming today with a little more in-depth information. When you talk about the frequency of the patrols, you wouldn't foresee any additional frequency, or would you?
I think it's a daily thing. If you go down there and you see people are hanging out or you're starting to see loitering, then you would know to step up your enforcement down there. It's like what we would do anywhere else if it's a boardwalk issue or other parks or the restrooms. If we see any issues that we have to patrol more often. In general, we do a sweep and ride through. Some of our officers ride through on the bicycles. At night, we lock some of the gates up around town and all that, and that's usually when they'll do another sweep at dusk to make sure. So it varies, but how often and frequent, but it is definitely every day.
And the reason I'm asking about all this is not, I want to be perfectly clear, not to challenge the project. My concerns are when I recently heard in a meeting someone talk about we, meaning the staff of the city of Rehoboth Beach, are always being asked to do more with less.
Right.
And the trade-off to that, for me, is to really surface what the additional budget needs will be and have clarity that budgets will need to be increased. Because if they're not increased, then you're going to be taking resources from somewhere. And I hearken back to the additional seasonal officers that are now at the boardwalk that we talked about during the budget process, and it felt like there was some consternation about funding that. But it is funded, and my real concerns are going forward is, are the funds going to be there so that the philosophy is not just add another project and do more with less? So that's where I'm coming from, that at some point you get to a critical mass if you keep doing that, that you will eventually sacrifice something in safety or professionalism or friendliness or, whatever the concept is, City Manager.
Well, certainly, there's nothing there now. So if
Right.
we add a $1 million Grove Park, Canal Front Park, there will be something there. We've discussed with Matt and Kevin, I've come up with a $10,000 maintenance plan on an annual cost. First 2 years, you heard from Matt in May, are included based on the funding for the initial project. So, and that's one of the, Commissioner Sharp, one of the reasons why we had the meeting with staff to see what additional expenses will be. I think this exercise today hopefully will show you that, it's, the police do patrol that area now. We have a somewhat significant homeless population during the year there, so they do have to, actually visit that and patrol that area. They'll continue to do so with the staff that is already there. On the good side of that, I'll say, it'll be cleaned up, it'll be more visible, and it'll be an area where the police just can navigate a little better than they can now. There'll be lighting to be able to see there, included in the project, and it's unknown, we can only project. So nothing's there now, it's built. I agree with what you're saying, but the additional police officers that were added for a purpose, and significantly, I think, now with just a couple weeks underway, it's working. The chief scheduled them to a degree where, the boardwalk isn't saturated with police, but there's certainly more there, and they're assisting with the beach patrol as well, with the tents and the no smoking ordinances and everything else. So you make a valid point, but at this point, we can only conjecture as to what we have to do in the future. And that was thought about and talked about with Matt.
And I want to ask, while you're still with us here, Chief Banks, I make an assumption as a taxpayer that when we add new video cameras somewhere, that all video cameras in town are working. And if they are, that's the expectation. If they aren't, then that needs to be corrected. And maybe you can address that.
Currently, first of all, I'll step back to the original question about out down to the canal. Yes, with a video camera, that's going to enhance to answer your question. If we need to move people down there, if we see people gathering and a police officer hasn't been there for an hour or two, that the dispatch would then be able to tell, hey, there's people down there to bring, send the resources down there. Yes, the cameras right now, all the cameras are working except for, we don't have the 3 on the boardwalk right now, except for the one at Wilmington Avenue. That is currently down. IT is looking at it. It is not repairable. I was advised of that Friday. So they are getting a price quote to get a new one, and city manager is aware of it too. And then we're going to get the funding for that to get that back up as soon as we get that price quote and get it ordered.
Okay.
So currently that one is not working.
Okay.
Morning, Walter Birmingham, 123 Hamilton Avenue.
Good morning.
It's a perfect question in my mind. We basically have a sergeant and 2 or 3 people on per shift.
I'm sorry,
Year-round, a sergeant and how many officers per shift?
2 additional, so 3 to a shift.
Have a crew of 3 on board, right?
Correct.
So we add something that is minus 14 foot down. Sitting down there, there's nothing there now. They don't have to do it. These officers are going to have to get out of the police car. We're adding stuff. And come budget time, everybody's going to be chopping back. We used to have a total of 4. Now we're down to 3. And we're doing more work than ever. And the police do a pretty good job. And then we get the summer people. And we have to train people. And we don't offer more the next year for those people coming back. And what's happened in the past is that the people that we train, they have been trained so well that other departments hire them. They take them on because they're trained, and then we have to start all over again. So come budget time, it's not, there's a 2-year warranty. This starts the minute you open this dock up, and it's 365 days a year. It's not the extra people that you hired for the boardwalk and the beach. You're gonna need extra people because this is just one more project. And it would be nice to know an estimate what it's gonna cost. If you need a television camera, order the damn camera. It's the peak of the season. But if we can put up stop signs, we can have a camera. But nonetheless, you need to be planning for the extras, and we still have no pricing for the rest of this stuff. The fence or the gate, is there going to be a fence there that the gate goes in?
Matt might be able to explain it better, but from the documents that I saw, there was a low-level gate at the railings as far as going down, so there was a spot we could just put a door swing gate the same height. Again, just an added barrier to.
It needs to be aesthetically pleasable, and it really needs to keep people out because you're going to have problems down there. And does that mean that the dock is not going to function after some hours?
Just like the park.
It would,
Just like the park.
the park hours at dusk, it would close.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
Okay,
Anything else?
thank you, Chief.
Thank you. I guess now Liz.
All right, good morning. Most exciting part, the landscaping, right? So we were able to review, and Matt was pretty far along with the landscaping, and I just wanted to make commissioners all aware of I know we're all very visual, so the end result is going to be very natural. So it's all native plants, hundreds of plugs of native grasses, marsh grasses. I think there are about 50 shrubs and 3 small flowering trees. So everything very natural, more like the street ends than, say, the Italian garden, if you're trying to compare them in your mind. With that comes easier maintenance, generally, native plants, grasses. So I don't anticipate a gigantic burden in terms of that. It'll probably be a couple thousand a year in maintenance if we were to contract it out. And that's not accounting for replacements over time. So saying the plants live 10 years or so. Otherwise, when we met with Matt, all of us really brought up the concern of how disconnected it would look when you are coming down the canal in your kayak or boat, and all of a sudden you go from kind of a wooded embankment to, boom, this small project area with the riprap on each side, which is probably about 10 years old now when they did that initial work. So we all thought it would be better if the landscape could be extended from on the north end, I guess, to the edge of the dock. So kind of when the dock starts, the nice looking landscaping starts. And then on the other end, going all the way towards the start of the canal bridge, so that we didn't just stop at the end of the fishing pier, have 30 feet of riprap and then a dock. So this way it'll flow more smoothly and overall look better. So that was our main concern with the landscaping. Other than that, I didn't have any other major issues with it. Like I said, it was very natural and seemed to fit in very well with the environment. We did have a couple of other overarching questions and concerns. My big one I brought up is how all the different uses of that area are going to flow now with the canal dock. So we have the farmers market, which draws a huge crowd. We have the bike trail, we have the museum, we have Main Street, we have the running club, which I think they meet later in the day, so maybe not a big deal. And how everybody is going to take their kayak and walk across that bike trail when somebody comes flying 50 miles an hour around the corner on their road bike. So I think we do need to think about how we're going to get them safely across that path there. And then also, I think everybody seemed okay with it, but the fact that our water fountains and restrooms we have them, they're just way across the park. And I think especially when people have just kayaked from Lewis to Rehoboth, they want to get off that kayak and fill up their water bottle immediately. So whether that's just signage pointing towards the restrooms and water fountains, or whether it's an additional cost to install the water fountain, depending on usage right there, but kind of planning for the future, I think would be a good one to make sure we have the capacity to do some of that if needed, if this becomes a huge hit like we hope. Other than that, I don't know if anybody has any questions.
I think some of those concerns are, you can try to anticipate, but otherwise I think you've got to be fluid
Yeah.
after it's built. My big bugaboo from the beginning, and I've been on board with this from the beginning, is maintenance costs. I want to make sure that we've always looked at the maintenance costs, and are we doing it right? And of course, you know, my kick in the last several years in town here has been on maintenance, and that especially if we do new projects, that we need to put a sufficient budget in there. I'd like to see whatever budget you put in there, you multiply it by 1.5, an extra 50%, so that you've got enough monies in there. I know, for instance, from the trees, when we originally cut down that bank in entirety and started over again, we were negligent and not, and that was during Greg Freese's time here, but we were negligent in not signing a maintenance contract. Maintenance would have been very easy and cheap at that time, but we didn't do it, and it took probably only a year for trees to repopulate that area and start growing again. And now you look at, we've reforested the canal bank. So, I'm not convinced that you've got enough money in there, but as long as you know everybody knows that that's important to be able to maintain it at the design level.
Yeah, and I mean, like they said, the first 2 years are covered under a maintenance agreement. So going forward, it's basically mulching and weeding, trimming the shrubs once a year. So it's about as simple as a landscape maintenance plan can be for that particular area based on the plants. But
and for me, maintenance goes beyond the landscaping. It goes to maintenance of the brick wall.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what happens if 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now the slope starts to slough off,
and I think
something. And
Kevin will be able to
scares
answer
me,
that.
you know?
Yeah, because
but what if the bricks start spalling or need to be repaired? You know,
painting, power washing, that's definitely Kevin's realm. So he'll have all the answers, I'm sure, with that. Anybody else? Good. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Kevin?
So I will just start by saying what we've been able to review so far on the canal project, as far as official construction documentation, is about the 50% design. So we worked through some of those concerns that I had with them, this past week. But obviously the biggest one for me is this thing's going to sit right over top of a 16-inch water main that services the city. And it runs from about the museum, underneath, down the bank, under the canal, comes up over by the little scooter shack over there. So we can't allow piles to be driven in the vicinity of that water main, either because of the fear of hitting it or just the vibration of the physical driving of the piles, shaking it loose and not discovering that there's a leak, until next year sometime, or if we ever, or right away, if it were to happen right away. So what we talked about is either going to a different type of piling system where they can either auger cast or drill the piles as opposed to driving the piles. So I think Matt has agreed to look at that, as well as to come out and positively identify the location of that water main so that we know that we can't drive within a certain distance from that, just to protect that. It's not a typical project where, if the contractor hits it and breaks it, he's responsible for fixing it. But we can't allow it to hit it and break it because of the impact it would have to the community if we lose that water main. Wouldn't put us completely out of business, but it would be a very large impact to us. So we've got to take whatever precautions are necessary to assure that we don't allow that to happen. So we're working with Matt to make sure that the final design takes that into consideration. One of the things we even talked about is maybe repositioning it a little bit farther north along the canal to get it out of the, the alignment of the water main at all. So we're looking at that. I can't really tell you at the 50% whether we've got it taken care of, but I think we're looking at it to make sure that we do address it. So that was obviously my big concern. The O&M, operation and maintenance of it, it's going to cost a little bit of money. We did put a dollar figure to it, working with my streets department, and we think it'll be about $10,000 a year to operate and maintain that. At least initially, we did not really look toward, at the 15-year mark or whatever, when you got to replace the deck or you got to replace the boards or whatever. But just as a routine maintenance, about 10 grand a year for power washing a couple times, for picking up trash, increase. You got to get the guys off the truck, got to get a cart to go down to the bottom to get the trash out of the barrels and bring it back up. So not a lot, but also not an insignificant number, but about 10,000, which I guess they're going to have the maintenance contract for the first couple of years anyway. So I think Liz and the chief kind of talked to the other items. Lighting is another concern we had about, we know there's always a fine line between enough lighting to be, really bright and safe, and too much lighting that, people don't like that either. So we'll have to make that adjustment once he does his light study and sees what the illumination would ultimately be. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell I have a question?
Okay.
Yeah. Just going back to the water main issue, since this is the first time I'm hearing that the water main is in proximity, could you talk a little bit more about exactly where it is?
So if you went out the back door of the museum, or I guess between the museum and Main Street. Is it Main Street's the second little building? So there's a valve right there. It runs from there kind of down the bank, under the canal, and up, if you know where the little motor scooter store is across the way, it comes up on the other side. So that's one of two crossings for and all of our water supply is on the other side of the canal. We know that. And that's one of two pipes that come across the canal to provide the water for the city. So.
And where is that in relation to the underground electric cable? Then we have electrics going under the canal as well?
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly where that's sited.
Okay.
Yeah. Matt may know.
And then, if I recall correctly, during the outfall work, we hit hidden railroad abutment. There used to be an old swing bridge across the canal, and of course it's totally gone, but for what we don't know underneath, and they hit the foundation. Have we done anything further to identify the limits of that foundation so that we don't? In other words, it would be best to try to do everything we can to avoid coming up with another $50,000 project to have to tear out some of the old concrete bridge abutment to do this.
Right, and I'm not. Matt can probably explain that as well. I don't know that they're gonna hit that old abutment. I just don't
Were
know.
you here, actually, Kevin, when?
No.
No, so I didn't think so. So we'll have to determine that location, but my recollection is it was further south than where we're talking about, but we'll make sure Matt identifies that.
So I have a question, Kevin. The water main. So is this water coming from the Lynch well? Is that the situation?
It comes from the well complex over there, right?
From where?
From that well complex. There's
Which
other
is-
wells out on
Which
that
is
side as well.
located where?
Lynch well system is out between Outback and Iron Hill Brewery.
Right, that's what I thought. So it's about half a mile away or something like that, right?
Sure. Yeah, maybe
Longer
a mile.
than that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are other wells kind of in between Lynch and,
So
Canal
I assume do we own that pipeline?
yes.
And so if anyone else along that pipeline is digging, they have to get permission from us in order to do any kind of construction? I'm just,
Yeah, I think I would presume we have an easement for that. So, yeah, they would have to clear that easement with any kind of work that's going on out there.
so Miss Utility
Is the
has in the past identified the pipeline, but they can't identify it on our side at the present time.
No, I mean, we know pretty much where it runs. I mean, you can see where the valves are on each side of the canal. So we have a pretty good idea on the alignment. The depth is an issue that we don't really know for sure.
Okay.
How deep it is under the canal or how deep it is under the bank. We're pretty good on the alignment, but until you expose it, we probably don't know.
So it probably, when they did that construction of those townhouses, I guess they built over top the pipeline, and it wasn't a problem.
Yeah, I haven't been back over there to see where it is. Yeah.
Just, yeah, I was just curious of how this works. So we do have an easement somewhere. Okay, thanks.
So just to be clear, did you say you were looking at an option maybe to move the project?
We talked about that that last week. Maybe it goes 30 feet farther south. You alter the way those ramps run down there. Maybe we can get it away from the water main.
Okay,
Good idea.
that would be a good idea.
Yeah, it'd be easier than drilling piles. Yeah.
Thank you.
Questions? Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
To alleviate any questions, if you go out to Rehoboth Avenue Extended, if you watch the fire hydrants, the water line is in immediate vicinity of the fire hydrants as you go out of town. It turns also and goes up Church Street and crosses the highway southbound lane off on the shoulder, fed by another one by the Route 1 bridge. But there's no problems on the water line, and it's easy to find. And to all of you, and Kevin knows this, but Rehoboth subscribes to this utility. So when somebody calls in this utility, they automatically get flagged, and the appropriate people go out there and mark what the lines are.
Thank you.
And we can't report on the funding sources coming from the group itself. I don't know if anyone here wants to do that, but Evan is here just to talk briefly about what the city's been doing as far as grants.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, and members of the public. So far, the city has applied for and received a total of 3 grants for the canal access dock. The first was a DelDOT, excuse me, Transportation Alternatives Program grant. If you recall, the TAP grant was actually used for Lake Avenue Phase 1. So it's a transportation-related grant. So we were actually advised, I have the letter here, August 29th, 2018, that we were awarded $300,000 that could be applied towards the construction of the Grove Park Canal Access Project. The second grant that we had applied for was an ORPT, which is an Outdoor Parks and Recreation Trails grant. This is through the Delaware Land and Water Conservation Trust Fund. So we received $90,000 for that for this project back in February 2019. So far, we've used approximately $10,000 from that $90,000. That was used for the retainer fee for Mr. Spong, as well as to start the construction document preparation. And then the final grant that we've applied for, and actually we received a letter, I want to say a week or two ago, was the CEPF, which is the Community Environmental Project Fund. Matt and I had went up to Dover and done a presentation, and we were awarded $20,000. So I'm supposed to be having a conversation with James Brunswick, who is the fund manager, hopefully this week to get that process started. And then also I think the chief had mentioned he was in contact with Captain Douglas Messick from Denrex Fish and Wildlife. He mentioned that safety equipment is encouraged but not required, and that there might be grants available to acquire some of that equipment. So that's something that we'll look into as well.
Thank you, Evan.
Yep.
So at this time, I'd actually like to introduce the 3 of the people from the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association, or actually 2, and Matt Spong. Mark Carter, who's in the back here, and Scott Scott is with Southern Delaware Tourism, Scott Thomas. So you can, Mark or Scott, one of you want to address what kind of funding we've received so far from non-government? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm closest to the mic.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Scott Thomas, the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Improvement Association. In addition to what you just heard, we have commitments from Dogfish Head at $50,000. We have another 100,000 committed in community transportation funds, and roughly 18,000 committed so far among private donors, and counting all the time. So this is part of the ongoing fundraising campaign. All in all, we're approaching 600,000 in committed funds to this project already, about 580,000. So that's the funding update right now. Am I missing anything? Thank you.
Good morning, Mark Carter. The only thing I would mention is that we're also talking to a variety of foundations. Actually, just last week, we met with Crystal Trust Foundation to discuss with them funding options. And by working as a nonprofit and a municipality, we're able to work towards a lot more funds. So the foundations are a huge asset to go after and talk to. So Longwood Foundation will be applying for this fall cycle with them. We have a current application in with the Welfare Foundation, which they are meeting, could literally be today. It's the middle of this month that they're meeting to go over awards for that. We've got a request in for $75,000 to that group. And then the same with Crystal Trust. We met with them to walk the property and show them the project. And then we also have, if you saw the recent Gazette article, Schwarzkopf is looking at some funding opportunities as well that would be similar to what Senator Lopez has done. And one thing I want to mention is that in the project, we put in about $100,000 of contingency. So we're actually looking to raise above and beyond some costs. So some of these things that are coming up, like cost of lights or cost of a gate or this or that, could be looked at through that contingency fund as well as maintenance. And then the organization would also continue to work as a friends group to look at helping work towards fundraising for maintenance and other types of things. Like say there's an addition of something that, you know, would look nice there, a different planning or something. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
That's the completion of the staff presentation. If you have any questions.
Yeah, did y'all give any thought to the parking situation over there? You know, we've got limited parking. We're adding a venue there to the museum, to the visitor center, to the Main Street situation. Have you figured out how we're going to handle the influx of extra cars parking over there?
Well, we did talk about that briefly. We do have limited parking right there at the visitor center. Of course, we do have street parking, so there's really not any way now, just projections, you know, who will come by vehicle, who will come by kayak, and, you know, other transportation needs. So the parking there in the west end of town isn't heavily utilized on any given day. Of course, July and August are the busier times, but we certainly haven't developed any new parking areas.
Well, I don't know what the current program is there, but I would think that perhaps you prioritize parking for the museum, give them a certain number of spaces, then you give the visitor center priority with so many spaces, and thirdly, Main Street, fewer spaces probably. But I would see that somehow we need to prioritize those over long-term parking for a kayaker to park there and be away for 7 hours or 6 hours.
I think currently there, the museum does have specific parking places that they save, as well as well, the chamber used to. Main Street they really don't have that many. Whether they need to do that or not, I don't know. So certainly, it makes sense to do it, and has been done.
And right now, the museum puts a couple cones out, the visitor center puts a couple cones out, and I think Main Street does, you know, especially on the busier days, the weekends. But, you know, I notice, I mean, these are some of the things that came up 10-plus years ago when the farmer's market was first started, and the big concern was parking. And you all have seen how many people go to the farmer's market, and every Tuesday, it's very successful, and people find parking spaces, whether it's in the lot, and I know that the chamber and the museum do set aside a couple with cones, but people seem to find parking spaces on the streets or walk. And I would think that's kind of going to be the case with a dock project like this. I don't know that there's going to be a dozen people going every hour or two with kayaks as much as you know, a city dock, much like the city park is in Grove Park. People will utilize it as they can when the weather's nice. Any further?
I just have a curiosity, since there was a little bit of confusion the last time on where we were with this project. I'm just kind of curious, well, I'm extremely curious on the specific next steps.
My thought here would be, we've had this, we've brought the staff here to talk about the maintenance. And I agree with a couple of the commissioners that as we go into the budget period, as we move into next year, we have to plan from a budget perspective. Obviously, a couple of years of maintenance contract are built into the project itself, but I think from our perspective, we should look at it from a budget perspective. Of putting it into the budget moving forward. But the next step in my mind would be if there's a consensus among the commissioners to take this to our next meeting for an official vote to move forward with the project as a city project.
Well, and I think, Mayor, what's got me a little concerned is the issue with the water main.
Oh, I think it's kind of reminded of, and Commissioner Mills brought this up, of last year. You know, when we were doing the outfall project, they had some problems there, and as they were going down, some of the electric poles were kind of falling in. So it's similar, but not the same thing. But yes, definitely, I think that's something that Kevin's going to be working with Matt and his engineers on, making sure that that's not something that.
So is it reasonable to expect we could get I recall Kevin Williams just talking about at the 50% level of design. Is it reasonable to get a little more information on whether or not the project will be modified or moved, or that's what I'm trying to grasp?
Should we, Matt can probably answer some of these questions, I think,
Yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
want.
I would think if we run into the pipe, it does have to be modified, as Kevin said, I mean, in some fashion. But I think there's probably a way to get around it, whether it's different things than piles, but Matt can maybe does that.
And just before Matt, if you will, you know, one of the reasons I asked the mayor to bring this forward is so the commissioners are aware that we've been paying for Matt's services since the beginning, or the re-beginning, if you will, of this project. The commissioners did vote last year to grant $20,000 for Matt's services. And to date, since July of 2018, actually, I'll say the end of May, the city's expended approximately $48,000 for Matt's services. So that $20,000 is in there, and the additional monies are taken from the Del Dot grant that Evan mentioned. We received permission to use some of that for construction documents. So just so you all know where we are with the project. Sorry, Matt, if you wanted to talk about the water main.
Good morning, Matt Spong from Landscape Architectural Services. Yes, after we met with the staff on Friday, well, actually before that, we've contacted a company called, well, several of them, Master Locators, and another one was called GRPS. They do ground penetrating radar to locate the water main more accurately in the project area. We have it from the GIS information and some aerial photographs that was supplied by Public Works years ago. So, and they also do a process called soft digging where they use a soil vacuum to very lightly excavate until they actually locate the top of the pipe. So then we'll actually have a depth, which we'll add to the documents. And if need be, we've looked at shifting the dock slightly to the north. At this point, we're looking at maybe 10 feet. 30 feet would be quite a big change, but 10 feet should be plenty to do what we need because we've already consciously missed it with everything. And the retaining walls are have very shallow depth because they don't rely on the depth of the footings. They rely on the weight of the block masses and the batter and geotech tiebacks for their structural integrity. They don't rely on a deep footing like a poured concrete wall would. And additionally, we're talking to our geotech and structural engineers about standards for vibration from pile driving, you know, what's the safe amount, and we can also do some monitoring if need be, which our geotech had experience with a tunnel that they built for Salisbury State University, pedestrian under Route 50, where they had to do vibration monitoring for a similar type of thing to make sure it didn't affect utilities or the road or the overpasses and so forth. So all this is going to be addressed, and we're looking to the cost items now, and we hope to have all that information added to the project budget you know, before the end of the month. That's our plan moving forward.
Thank you, Matt.
Kevin, just real quick, is Kevin still here?
Yeah, you still?
Oh, you're heading back there. Good call. So, what's your level of confidence percentage-wise that you can effectively manage any risk associated with having this pipe, I'll call it in my simple terms, in this project area?
It's definitely manageable.
Okay.
Obviously, the key is locating it and then taking the appropriate safety measures to get away from it as we can. But it's certainly manageable. It'll cost more in the initial project because it may be a different pile technique, and you know, auger cast piles are typically more expensive than just a driven pile. But if we account for that up front, I think we'll be okay.
So it sounds like you're saying 100% confident that
Oh,
it
I'd
could
never
be
say
managed?
that. Yeah. So, the soil materials are just, you know, too indeterminate. You know, you could get a layer of something in there that vibrates at a different frequency that could shake it loose. Yeah, so I would never go that far.
So 99.9. Thanks.
But it's engineering. It's able to be solved engineeringly.
Got it.
If that's a term.
Good answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Just to clarify, if you need to modify the location a bit, would it go a little further south or a little further north?
North.
North.
Yeah,
Okay.
I might have said south earlier.
Yeah, right.
Right.
then, so I just
Definitely
wanted
to the north.
clarify that. Yeah, thank you.
And just one last clarification for me. Not that there would be, but if there were to be some damage to the pipe, how does that work? Does the project pick up the cost? Does the city pick up the cost?
In my experience, it's written into the contract that if he damages anything, he has to repair to our satisfaction. I would imagine that that's probably in that contract clause.
Yeah, there would be something in the general conditions about, I suppose we'd put a separate clause in there for extra liability insurance from the contractor for this issue. Of course, that'll drive up costs somewhat, but it's just like having any other type of bond, construction bond. There's always a performance and payment bond that are standard. So we'd ask for, I guess, a rider for extra liability for the protection of the water main.
Well, I believe in Murphy's Law, so, something goes wrong, it may well do that. Now, if my familiarity based on the outfall and some of these other projects we've done, that if they're dependent upon our research and they hit pipes or something underground, then they're not liable. So I think it's
And
I
that's
think it's a
exactly why we've
great
told them they've got to
concern,
go
yeah.
physically locate it,
Yeah.
not just go by
Right.
what we have as as-built.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to hear all the effort that's being put into making sure where things are and to mitigate risk as much as possible. So this is, I thank everybody for their indulgence on this because I think it's really helpful and certainly in the spirit of transparency, it's best to go this way. Just my feeling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin, I'm curious, and thanks for all of this. Where's the second water pipe that comes under the canal in the city?
Down near the Streets Department yard.
Oh, okay.
Kind of under the Route 1, adjacent to the Route 1 bridge over the canal.
Thank you.
Walter Birmingham, I understand that you're in the middle of thinking about and doing, but a discussion earlier was the license agreement. If the city is going to, if it's going to be a city dock, you need to remember to put the lease, ask the court to put the lease in the city's name, because I think you have it in the Historical Society's name at this point in time. And to those of you that don't know, or depending what you think, pile driving in a case like this is not taking a hammer out there and driving a piling into the ground. They would go out there probably and take an auger and auger it down and dig it up and then slide the piling down into it, whether it be a hollow piling and refill it or a solid piling and refill it. But the water main is not the problem, it's the planning ahead.
Thank you, Walter.
Yes.
Gary Glass, 105 Country Club Drive. I just have a couple questions. Just for clarity, Matt is the operator of the ferry service now that goes between Lewis and no, that's not correct. Okay.
Matt is a landscape architect.
Okay, so he has nothing to do with the ferry that currently runs.
No, it has nothing to do with that.
Okay, another thing for clarity, it said 2 boats 30 feet long would be able to dock at the dock. Are we planning for 2 boats? I've heard that Dogfish Head wants to run a boat from Lewis down and dock for guests that they have at a hotel. Is there going to be 2 boats, or is this dock just solely for the use of the ferry to let people off and pick people up?
This is a public dock.
So nobody's going to dock there for 3 or 4 hours?
No.
The ferry's going to drop off?
No.
Okay. The other question that I have is, and the last question, well, the future of the dock and basically the future of the canal. It's my understanding a lot of boats cannot motor up and down that canal, especially around Dewey Beach, except at high tide because their propellers hit the silt. It's only about a foot deep in most places. I've heard that kayakers can't kayak down towards Dewey except through a very narrow channel because the canal is filling in. I've also heard that the Corps of Engineers has abandoned the canal and that it's extremely costly to dredge. So something that Rehoboth couldn't take on by itself is the dredging of the canal. What's the future prospects of that canal being usable in 15 years from now or 10 years from now? Does anybody know?
Just as much as it's been usable for the last 100 years.
I don't see that that's relevant because it's filling in.
It's been filling in off and on for the last 100 years.
So
It
it's
moves
probably going to
around.
fill in then at some point.
At some point in time, the Army Corps of Engineers may say that they do have monies to do dredging. The city may take it on, the county may take it on.
Okay, so we would be building this dock with private funds without the understanding of how long that canal would actually be able to be used by a boat going up and down it.
Sure.
Okay, so that's a risk that we're taking.
Oh,
The question, okay, go
You
ahead.
know, unfortunately, I don't see the canal filling in the next 100 years. If nothing else, the canal's probably going to get higher with the climate change.
Well, Rehoboth Bay is filling in. I mean, the yacht club on Rehoboth Bay that does sailboating can't sailboat right now because they have to, I understand Henlopen Acres is dredging.
I
again.
don't think that's anything that has anything whatsoever to do with construction.
Okay, new subject. Funding. Will the city be voting on funding this dock should they not be able to come up with the appropriate funding to do everything that they want to do. So let's just assume they say 600,000, they talked about 200,000 just now. Let's just say they can come up with $350,000 down the road when we start this project. Is the city going to step in and fund that difference? And if you are you going to vote to do that when you vote to approve this project?
The vote that we'd have now is the vote to move forward with the project. As far as city funding, that would be a completely separate vote.
So they could get started with the project. If they run out of money, the city would have to come and take a vote as to whether they want to fill that gap or they want to encourage them to go out and find more private funding.
Or we could just say no more project,
So it could get halfway built and just stop.
just like any other project, yes.
Well, most people don't start an office building and then stop halfway up this.
Absolutely, and I
tower.
don't anticipate that happening based on the funding that they've been able to accomplish so far.
Okay, so the city's not going to vote to encumber any funds
That is not on the docket at the moment.
or in the future.
I don't know what the future brings.
Okay, so you aren't, but you're not talking about that now today, funding.
That has nothing to do with today.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Any other questions? If not, back to your question before, I would think, if it's up to the commissioners, but what I would hope to do is at the next meeting, the June 21st meeting, is just have a formalized vote to move forward with the project.
I'm in support of having a formalized vote at the next meeting.
Say that again.
I'm in support of having a formalized vote at the next meeting.
As am I.
Same
I
for
am.
me.
I am too.
And I could absolutely support that, and I think we could be very, very clear on what moving forward means, so that everybody's on the same page and it's smooth.
I agree, because I think it is hard for some, including me, to disconnect the funding part of it. You know, to say we support it's one thing, but if that commits us to filling in the blank of another $250,000, I think we need to know what we're getting into ahead of time.
But, I mean, I'm encouraged by the level of detail that is being discussed. And I believe that what we would be voting on was just to allow more due diligence to be done, things to progress so that we can get some of these questions answered that currently are unanswerable. And we'll continue to do this along the way.
Yes, and however, it would also give the opportunity to the LRCIA to move forward in their bidding process. And I know there's a specific calendar of events over the
Exactly, and
next
I
6
think-
to 10 months.
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No, sir.
it also gives the, it demonstrates the support by the city so that fundraising can continue as well, because they know it's going to be a viable project.
Yeah, and I think that's very important as we move forward, is, that this group can have the city's backing, that yes, we are moving forward with that, and it makes it a lot easier for them to go out and say, hey, we've got the city behind us, can you give us some more money? And
We heard today from the grants from the city, from Dogfish Head. Mark Carter gave his take on the fundings. I think it would be good to put this in chart form with a reminder of what the proposed total expenses are to be, how much funding that we've gotten and where the sources are so far, how much more funding is anticipated and where that funding is anticipated to come from. And I think that will help answer a lot of questions for the public as well as us.
And we can have that for you for the meeting of the 21st. Matt, if you can work with us on that. My question is, and what are the expectations of the commissioners for that potential vote on June 21st? Would you be looking for Matt to come back with something definitive as far as a different location for the plan, or whatever the results are from that's only 10 days from now, so I don't know if that's even possible. Or would that even depend on your vote one way or the other?
I think it's been voiced already here today that we're very concerned about the water pipe, and Matt's working with Kevin and whoever the engineers would be to make sure that the process works. But I think it's probably important, because it is only 10 days away, to be able to give the city's, point of view that, yes, we're interested in the project moving forward. However, there are a lot of concerns. We're concerned about money and whatnot, but, these things are being worked on as we speak. And I know that there is, as Mark mentioned before, they are in the process of not only contacting those foundations, but putting together a funding source project of, if you will, raising funds just like anything else.
I'm comfortable with that at this juncture, because I think the spirit of everybody working together to make sure we've got a solid project, we've looked at the risks that might be out there, that we've talked about how we would mitigate those and what's the worst case scenario. To me, we're doing all the right things to have the best transparency that we can. So I'm feeling pretty good with what I'm hearing today, and it just gets down to the nuance of when we vote on the 21st, exactly what, just to make sure we have a clear understanding and stay in lockstep if that turns out to be the vote. That this is what the vision is, this is what the substance is at the moment.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you guys for
Thanks,
giving
everybody.
us that information. And thank you, Kevin and Liz and Chief, for your information as well. We're going to move right into old business B, which is continuing discussion of additional borrowing authority for the outfall phase 2, 3 maintenance issues related to the plant.
Thank you, Mayor. So this next piece regarding the wastewater treatment plant, on a daily basis, we internally discuss funding, funding sources, our loan summary, which is very specific. I think you all have a copy of that in front of you, and it's made available to the public as well. So Bert has prepared this and is prepared to just talk to you about this. Additionally, Kevin, who's looking at the operations of the plant on a daily basis, it's important that we explain to the commissioners the current state of the plant. You had a pretty lengthy presentation by Kevin last month about a couple of the issues that we're looking at and some funding that needed to be moved around in order to properly address the problem areas. And what you'll hear today, unfortunately, is another problem area and needs to be brought to your attention. Obviously, what I don't want to happen is some, God forbid, catastrophic event and not have you familiar with the possibilities of that. So that's basically what we are here for today. Bert, I think if you can start and just advise the commissioners of this document in front of them.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The purpose of the document was, one, to give you a status of where we stand right now on our outstanding debt, and number two, to sort of give you a view of the challenges that we have. We have a $75 million debt limit, and we intend to stay under that, and we should be able to. But looking at the document, basically we have $62 million worth of outstanding debt, which is well under our $75 million. However, if we were to draw it all today, which we're not, and we would be at $77 million. But the real task is to monitor this in a way that we know how much principal we're reducing on the existing loans that we have in the second table down at the bottom. So we're knocking off about $1 million a year, and we have a $4.5 million offer from the county. And what's really sort of made this more complicated is we've had more requirements for upgrades to the plant than we probably anticipated when we started the project. But I think it's a manageable task, but I think it's difficult because you have got to go ahead and start projects, and you can't stop a project in the middle because you're at your debt limit. So we just have to be alert and manage your project. But I think that we're close, and I think that's an important message. What the commissioners decide in the future, if we had some other major infrastructure project, then there'll be other challenges, you know, whether you raise the debt limit or whatever. But I mean, right now, we should be okay. And are there any questions?
I have one.
Okay, good.
When you use the term, "we should be okay," it gives me a little pause, so maybe you could.
Well, anything can happen. Suppose you had a major piece of infrastructure go down and you had to go ahead and, you know, borrow money. I think one of the things I did do, you know, assuming that's not going to happen, let's be maybe a little optimistic, but one of the things that I did look at was the terms of prepayment on these loans. And I pulled the bond documents and looked at them, and basically, there was good news there, because the USDA project, the Lynch Well loan, and the Schoolview project all would allow us to reduce principal. The SRF loans that we're taking out for the plant and the outfall, there's no prepayment privilege there, so you know we've got to pay according to the schedule. So if you ask me what would I do if we had something come up, I'd say, well, one of the things, if we had the available cash on hand, we could prepay some of those loans that permit prepayment and keep ourselves under the $75 million limit. So that would be an option.
I'm sorry, what's the difference, were you done, Terry?
No, I was just going to say, that's okay. I was just going to say, I think that answered my follow-up question, which was what would we do if you needed it? And I think you beat me to the punch and explained that.
Yeah, those are basically the safety valves. And but to turn those safety valves, you got to have the cash on hand to go ahead and reduce that debt to keep yourself under that limit.
So then the obvious question for me is, would we have that cash on hand?
If you don't spend too much of it, we might.
Okay then, Bert. Thank you.
Bert, you're not getting off that easy. Come on back up here.
Come back.
What's the difference between the $75 million ceiling and the $52 million ceiling? I guess 75 overall budget and 52 is just on the wastewater outfall. I'm just unclear on the difference.
Well, the
between
52
that.
million was the plant and the outfall project.
So just on that project.
But we've got to look at our other outstanding debt.
Okay.
And,
So overall, okay. And then, wait, come on, Bert, I love talking to you. You have all the answers. This might be a little bit of a tougher one, or maybe easy. And just doing some kind of reading and research in preparation for this discussion, I noticed that in 2013, there was a $10 million, I don't know if it was a grant or a loan given to the city for wastewater treatment plant upgrades. Like, what happened to that money? Was that for something else, like pre-phase one upgrades, or am I misreading that? But I'm just curious, is that calculated in anywhere? Is that something that was a one-time investment? I'm just curious what that was and where that went.
Are you sure that's right?
I
mean,
the Gazette reported it, so I think it's probably right. I mean, so it was Ryan, not Chris, but I read about it and I couldn't find anything else on the city site, but I was just curious if we did indeed get that, if that was something we've used, if we already have, if we have it, if it's part of the debt ceiling, if it was a grant.
Well, it wouldn't have anything to do with debt ceiling because it's a grant.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that-
in the
we
article, it
like
says
grants.
grant and then it says loan, so I'm not sure if it's a grant or a loan. Or if it's even real, or if it, you
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
Again, not that I doubt the Gazette, but,
Well, it's not an outstanding loan, so that's good
Okay.
news. And
Okay.
if it was a grant, it was revenue in the time that we received it.
so there were upgrades done in 2013. I'm sorry if you don't know, we can
2013,
follow up later. I'm just curious, when I saw that, it was, it's not something I'd heard about
Well,
previously.
you know, back in those, I mean, primarily, we were spending money on engineering costs back in that 2010, 2013. We didn't, I mean, we spent, I think, in the area of $3 million just in pre-engineering before we got started. Now, Dewey Beach and Henlopen Acres paid for a portion of that, too, so it wasn't all
Okay.
on the city.
Okay. I'd like to know a little bit more about that, if
Well, we'll
indeed
look
there
for that
was.
$10
I'm just
million.
curious, yeah. Maybe it's sitting somewhere and we don't know about it. I doubt that, but anyway, okay. Thanks, Bert.
Bert and his accounting,
know.
various accounts. I keep looking for money and he goes,
I know.
"Oh,
I'm
no,
trying.
it's
I'm
not in that
trying."
account. Okay. And can you give me a little help with the screens? So Bert, as you know, I gave you a good little rundown. It became very, for those of you that have been participating in the rate study group, you can understand the importance of those loans and that debt capacity because of the major infrastructure that we still need to do, major work we still need to do down there. And, you know, how we develop that rate structure depends upon whether we're paying it out of capital expenses or we have loan capacity left to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about phase 3 here in a moment. But, you know, what we have the ability to borrow for phase 3 is very important into how we structure, you know, the follow-on contracts for phase 3 and phase 4 upgrades. So we spent a lot of time kind of figuring out when those paybacks start happening and all to try to make the most sense out of whatever the rate structure is going to be as we go forward. And you'll certainly get more than you ever wanted to hear about the rate structure at another opportunity. I want to come back today. We spoke a month and a half, 2 months ago about some issues we had down at the plant that I asked and you supported getting them rolled up, or asked the county to roll them up into the phase 2 project. So I just wanted to come back to you. They went to their council last week and have some, I guess they have a counter proposal to our proposal. So I just want to bring you up to speed on that. If you recall, back in the beginning of May, I kind of showed you some of the issues we're having down at the plant that we really can't wait till what would have been phase 3 to get this work accomplished. So we had estimated that to be about a $3 million set of project, or a project that we would like to incorporate into phase 2 so it can be done as soon as possible. So we got together, talked to the county, had some coordination with them about what might be possible. So on the left side of the screen, you can kind of see the current set on what truly is in phase 2, and it's primarily electrical upgrades. The county was fronting the money. It's about a $6 million project. They were going to cost share it at 50-50 with us, which is a very good deal for us. And they were going to give it, we were going to pay it back with 0 interest over a 10-year term. So it was very, very nice of them to offer to do that. Well, we obviously took them up on that offer. When we went back in May to say, hey, we've got these emergency things we would like you to include in phase 2, they took it to their, that was our proposal, you can see on the right. So basically use the same terms that we had already agreed to on phase 2, apply them to this additional $3 million requested add to the scope for phase 2, and hopefully use the same terms. They went to their county, I guess last week. County came back with the original $6 million agreement to leave that as it is. We'll still do the 50-50 cost share, 0 interest and pay back over the 10. But the additional 3 that we had voted to request from them in early May, they want to go back to our current existing agreement on cost share, which is the city is a 58%, and the county is a 42, and they want to charge us interest on that additional amount of money. So our additional $3 million then, instead of 1.5 being the city share at 50-50, becomes, about 1.75 for the city share, and then the interest on that over the 10-year at the 2% they want to offer is about another 35. So, about a $200,000 bogey that I wanted to come back and let you know that that's what they're kind of offering as a counter to what we've offered. So going forward, I still wholeheartedly support adding that in at that cost and at those terms. I guess we will vote, the board will vote at the next meeting whether or not to take on that additional responsibility. If you do, it just takes the mayor to sign the agreement that the county sent to us for signature, and if that happens, then they'll add that to the scope of phase 2 and then proceed. Just for your information, they are proceeding with the design of incorporating that in there so as to not to delay the award of the project, because we all want them to advertise at the end of July. So they're on schedule to do that.
So basically, Kevin, what you're asking for is somewhat similar to what we did before. The county offered to lend us $3 million at 0% for 10 years on that $6 million project for phase 2. We'd paid $3 million, they pay $3 million. And this is the separate $3 million for phase 3, additional work that needs to be done yesterday rather than tomorrow. And of that $3 million, we would be responsible for 58%, not 50%. And it would be at 2%, not 0, and it would still be over 10 years. And so what you're looking for is us to approve at some point in the future that $3 million, but it's 1.74 at a 2% for 10 years.
And can I ask an obvious question for me? I'm somewhat, maybe this is very remedial, but we didn't get the better terms because? What happened? Or maybe that's an unfair question, I don't know.
I'm assuming the county council made this decision, right?
Yeah, well, no,
Yeah.
it had nothing to do with us, because
So-
obviously, as Kevin said, he put that in front of them the same way as the other.
Right, the county just decided they wanted a little bit more money.
I mean, honestly, they were very nice to us to come out and say, hey, the $6 million, because they were so interested in getting that phase 2 finished. They basically said, hey, you put up 3, we put up 3, and it's not even out of the line of credit with the SRF. And so it's actually a cheaper, the project probably would have been closer to $7 million, but because the county's doing it with their money, we were able to cut back some of the costs, the labor costs. And so they offered it that way, whereas this way, I think the county council may have said, whoa, wait a minute, we just did that lent them $3 million for 0 over 10 years. We got to look at something else. And 2% is still very fair, relative, but,
Well, 0's better, but.
Right. That's better for us. But they've got their constituents as well.
Sure.
And Kevin, this would be factored into the rate study that's being done?
That's correct.
Okay.
It is correct.
So, a couple things. One, I'm just a little concerned is, and I know you're still relatively new and looking into kind of all the issues and discovering new issues as we're going along here, but this is now like the second month in a row we've heard a request for moving up some funding, and is there a way to take a month or so, and I'm quite sure you're thinking about this already, and come back to us with more of a forward-looking, here's what we anticipate over, kind of given what we're seeing with the plant, what we anticipate moving forward over the next year, and as opposed to kind of every month hearing about something new.
You're going to love my next presentation.
And then number 2, just as you're going through that, I'm wondering, I'm looking back kind of over the numbers over the years, they've changed a lot, and gone up, unfortunately, from 2009. And I get inflation, I get cost of materials and labor, I get all that. But I'm wondering, we're relying on kind of one cost estimate from one vendor. And are we doing any kind of independent verification and validation of these costs and these proposals, given especially that they're getting a significant amount of administrative fees, I think 30% in one of the estimates, towards these projects? So those are my two questions. I hope you followed along on both of those.
Let me just go to the first one.
Yeah, thank you.
So the kind of the footprint or the blueprint for the work that needs to be done down there at the plant was done several years ago by GHD. They broke that into phases as they thought would be manageable. You know, day one of the phase one, actually I think they started with a phase 0 maybe, but should have been several years ago. Several years ago.
Yeah.
But they broke it out into what they thought were manageable chunks that maybe and I'm not sure of all the reasons they broke it out the way they did, but because of, I think some of it was emergency nature, the electrical stuff that we're seeing down there, somebody getting electrocuted, urgent, should have been done 3 years ago, let's do now. Then there was kind of the process improvements, which included the oxidation process, the biosolids process, all those things that were kind of the next set of emergencies. Maybe not urgent at that time, but pending emergent.
Yeah.
I grouped them into phase 3, and then all the other things that just should be done in a good order of maintenance, kind of lumped into phase 4. So all that was done several years ago. Obviously, things have happened as we've progressed. Maybe not in accordance with that timeline, or maybe we just didn't implement as early as we should have, and these things are coming to fruition. You'll see one in a minute that, you know, 2 weeks ago was fine. You know, today not so fine. The piece about the vendor, I'm not a little uncertain as to what you really mean by the vendor. I mean, GHD.
I mean GHD.
Okay, so GHD, as the engineer consultant, compiled an estimate for that work to be done. It was done at a certain date. Obviously, you get the inflation things associated with it. How those are packaged, again, if we're going to try to package some things, maybe not in accordance with their plan, kind of hard to say that. But I would say, in all honesty, their estimates have been pretty darn good for us.
Okay.
I mean, they've good consultant, estimate a little high. You always run that balance. You either estimate high and then you scare them away from the project, or you estimate low, get them to buy the project, and then it's a lot more. So that's a fine line that consultants have to walk. I think they've done a great job because of what we've seen with the bids so far, with the outfall, with the force main. They've come in a little under their estimate to include their
So we're
engineering
still bidding
fees.
out this individual work.
Say again?
We're still competing the work. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay,
Right.
that answered my
So then we're getting,
Got it.
you know, one of the things about combining phase 2 with the county's project and the order of magnitude of the projects, and it enables us to save considerable amount of money on that particular project because, you know, they're not using the loan, so they don't have to use Davis-Bacon wages. They can use, you know, a little lower rates for some of the skill sets. So all good things, all really good things, actually.
Yeah, and actually,
Helpful, thank you.
the work on phase 2, when the county first came up with this idea, because they looked at it from a cost perspective too, because they have to pay like we have to pay because they're our customer. And the project for the electric was probably up and over 7 million. But because the county's doing it and matching it with their other project, you know, there's economies of scale. And then because the Davis-Bacon wages, they cut back on that. So they're already saving us on that first phase or second phase, probably $1 million, and it's kind of half of that's ours. And, you know, I think unfortunately, and Kevin's going to bring it up in a minute, we're finding out about stuff that should have been addressed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and okay, maybe we can address it in 2 years when we have the money, and it's just not possible anymore. We're just running up against, that 52 million's not going to pay for what we have to do, and that's why the rate study and so on and so forth. Sorry to talk on, but
Yeah, so that all plays together, obviously, with the borrowing capacity and what we can put into what phases, and then, as you will see in a couple of weeks when we talk to you about the rate study, you know, the various peaks and things associated with when we have to switch over to capital outlay to pay for some of these major items. But we'll save that discussion for another day. Okay. All right, so let me pull up this other one. So that's the phase 2. We'll hopefully, the board will vote in a couple of weeks as to what to do with that. Another issue that has arisen, down at the plant, since we put the second half of it into operation, I just want to talk to you about it today. We're not really asking you to do anything. It's really just to be aware that this is happening. And I know Commissioner Sharp likes to wake up in the middle of the night and worry about things that I worry about as well.
I do.
So I wanted to give her another reason to wake up at 3 in the morning and
Wonderful.
wonder if we're okay. So we're going to talk about the mixers and the aeration. And I'm sorry it's going to get fairly technical because it really requires kind of a technical understanding to know what the problem is. And I think you'll appreciate it when you see it. So we're going to talk about, and I'll try to use the pointer maybe, but we're going to talk about the oxidation ditches and the process down here. So, phase 2, we added some work here at the headworks, which is what you saw those pictures of today. But now what we've had happen here recently is have an issue with the process itself. So as you probably know that, we have some redundancy on our oxidation ditches. We have 2 separate trains, they're called, so you can really operate one without the other. And we take one offline in the wintertime because our flows are such that we can manage with one train in operation. And typically we'll put one in operation, take the other one out, do our preventive maintenance that we do on that other train. And then in May, June timeframe, the flows start to come up, we have to put it back into service. And that's what we did. So I'm going to talk to you specifically about, there's our oxidation ditches. And if you look real close, sitting on top of the catwalk are 4 motors that I've circled. Those motors drive the big propellers that I think several years ago we had to do an emergency replacement on the propellers themselves. But down at probably a 15, 18-foot shaft, prop shaft, the propeller sits at the bottom. That's what mixes up the mixed liquor, it's called, the slurry. And at the same time it's mixing it, it injects oxygen, air, into that process. So then the air allows the bacteria or the microbes in that slurry to then digest the solids. They all settle, they eat to their heart content, get heavier, they settle out at the bottom. We separate the trains into now liquid and solids. So that's kind of a thumbnail on the process. We are having problems with one of our pumps that we just put back into service as the flow increased this spring. So for a period of time, the pump has been, I would say, vibrating. You'll see some things that the crew down there has done over the last several years to try to help that thing to keep operating. But when we put it back into service in end of May, and then in about 2 weeks ago, it's gotten worse. It's no longer just vibrating, it's knocking. So if you know anything about mechanical engines and mechanical processes, knocking is not a good thing because it's physically banging against something which is going to cause it to damage.
So Kevin, just I don't want to lose this.
Sure.
When we put it back into service, had it been refurbished or?
Had not been refurbished, had just been, they're tuned up, you grease the fitting, you
Okay.
do those kind of things. Had not been overhauled or replaced or anything else.
Okay.
Had been tested.
Thanks.
So put it back, brought the flow back in, put it back into service. It runs for a couple of days, and then boom, we start hearing the knocking, and then that's why I'm here today. So this, again, just to kind of give you a little understanding, here's where this is one of those, this right here is one of those prop shafts that has the propeller at the end of it. Also associated with this process is the air. I told you gets injected down at the bottom of the propeller, and that's what allows the bugs to grow and the bugs to eat the solids and do all the things that bugs do. So you'll see there's a wall, a dividing wall between the chambers. So it's mixing it, stirring it here, and then pushing it through a draft tube underneath that intermediate wall, and it all comes up on the other side. And I'll show you a little video of that here in a moment. But this is where we're talking. These are the motors up top. It's got a long propeller shaft down to the propeller at the bottom. The air lines up above push the air down through these pipes and into, here's the propellers in the dry mode. So this is out of service this winter. You can see there's 2 on each train, and there's the propeller. The air lines come down, inject into, this is a hollow metal cylinder, for lack of a better term, here, where the air is distributed, and then it comes in through these little spokes, and it has diffusers, little openings on those spokes that then help diffuse the oxygen all gets pushed down through the other side of the wall, out the other side, and all the bugs are just happy. They're tickled pink, got all kinds of oxygen to eat and breathe and whatever these bugs do. So part of our problem now is that we got the knocking, right? So then we can cycle back the motor a little bit, maybe run it at a little fewer RPMs to eliminate the knocking. When we do that, we don't have enough force to drive the oxygen through. So we get all the oxygen coming up. You can see it bubbling up on the wrong side of the chamber. So instead, this is the mixer side of the chamber. This is where it comes out. You can kind of see the turbulence. So when we start seeing the bubbles in here, then we're not getting the mixture, we're not getting the oxygen out into the mixed liquor that then allows the bugs to do their work. So if we crank up the motor if we crank up the RPMs on the motor, we're banging against the side. And if we don't crank up the RPMs on the motor, we don't get the oxygen mix that we need for our process.
Quick question, just about that. Is this, I might have missed this, is this the new propeller that was installed, or is this another?
That's a great question, and I don't know which propellers were replaced back then. So I don't know if it's a new propeller. We did not replace the shafts, it's my understanding. We just did the propeller blades themselves.
And this was done by our staff?
No.
It was sent out to Philadelphia.
Somebody from Philadelphia.
Then we have to rebuild two?
Two, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't know if these were the ones that we replaced the propellers on or not.
So I'm getting lost a little bit, but that's okay. Is it the propeller that's doing it or the motor?
It's the motor.
It's the motor, thank you.
But the motor spins the propeller. We
Got it.
think, I'll show you another little picture. I think that this is kind of where it comes down. You can see the propeller. It sits inside of a sleeve called the beer can, of all things. But it's not physically attached to that. So it's all supported above, probably a guide tube, for lack of another word. We think it's banging on the sides of that, as it's not a true spin. So it's banging as it vibrates back and forth, we think. But because it's under that sludge, I'm not really wanting to dive in there and just kind of check it. So this gives another perspective here. So the air tube, the air pipe coming down the side injects it in. So you can kind of see what the crew down there has done over the course of several years to try to help keep everything working. So all these little supports, these braces, are all add-ons to try to keep things in place and to keep from vibrating and moving. This is that cylindrical tube that runs around the outside that holds all the air that then comes in through the spokes or the diffusers. And you can see it's been welded to be fixed multiple times. Again, we've put brackets on it to try to hold that in place to keep it working. But we think right now that this propeller is banging up against the sleeve at the bottom, the beer can at the bottom, which is being heard through the whole chain of the motor and the prop shaft above. And again, it's the other one's working fine, and we can adjust it within the particular. We have to keep both ditches in operation now because of the flow. We can have the art of this is that you can crank the one good mixer and motor up a little bit, and it'll help, but it doesn't solve the problem. So we'll jack the one motor up a little bit. We'll reduce the RPM on this one, try to limp it along through the summer, and then try to fix it in the wintertime. And so we really can't afford to take it out of service, take that ditch out of service now. So we'll talk about what our proposed alternatives are right now. But yeah, that's in fact the case. So here's another shot of kind of it, and you can kind of see how it forces it down across the oxygen as it's diffused out. Boom, forces it up the other side. There's kind of another shot on it. And I think they sent me this.
Kevin, we believe you.
Yeah. Thanks. So that's what we're trying to solve. So one of the things we want to do, okay, more than you needed. So one of the things we're going to try to do that we've already started implementing is we're looking at other mechanisms to get the oxygen over into the turbulent area of the ditch and running some pipe down, build some diffusers on the end of it, sink it down in the other side. That seems to be one of the more promising options. We also have looked at, with the help of GHD, maybe we bring a tanker truck in of oxygen and then somehow get it across the wall and down into the bottom of the oxidation ditch so we can keep the oxygen in the process so we continue to treat the effluent in the slurry in the appropriate manner. So looking at a couple things. One, just piping it ourselves from those tanks, the air lines up on the catwalk, down over this wall, stick it down into this turbulent area of the oxidation ditch, and keep the oxygen going in it. So those are kind of the two leading options right now that we're
So the
we're
two
taking.
options, they're not theoretical, you know they would work.
We know they work. We're not sure, we're not 100% confident they will work to the conditions of our permit, but it's what we can try. So we're getting everything, right now we're able to kind of manage it with the, a little higher RPM on the one, a little lower. But in case that doesn't last through the summer, then we're getting everything piped, so we have everything kind of standing by in case that one motor that's banging fails. And that's what we will do, is we'll interject air on the far side of the wall, keep the process running, and hopefully it'll still meet the conditions of our permit. And we think it will, in all honesty.
And Kevin, I guess we can assume that in the next 8-10 weeks, the flow, if anything, is going to get heavier.
Correct. We're rapidly approaching 4th of July, and obviously that's our peak. So, yeah.
So that's an important piece of the issue here,
Right.
that, we're going into high season. Kevin, this is back to 2014 when the issue was first reported. Oxidation ditch T2B, do you know which one that is? Yeah, so just to identify that, that was the issue with whatever you're showing up here, whichever one that is.
And I'm sure back then, 2014, it was probably had that vibration to it without the knock. Now we're to the point where it's kind of banging. So just
And
want to
that's
make
when
sure.
the blades broke as well.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so it may very well be the same mixer now. It's the issue's up.
So I guess my question is, do you believe that the vibration in the engine is causing the shaft to kind of be out of alignment, which is creating the knocking of
The other way around. The shaft out of alignment's causing it to bang. That
So
we're
you
hearing
don't-
the knock on the motor.
You're not really sure what the proper fix would be, whether it's the engine itself or whether it's the shaft that needs to be?
We're pretty confident it's not the motor.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So whether it's the propeller that's hitting, whether it's the slide that's hitting in the beer can, or whether it's something else that we don't know, but yeah, we're pretty confident it's not the motor.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just apparent in the motor.
You hear it
It's-
there?
Yeah, it's the mechanism that, we're able to pick it up with.
I'm sure you're doing this, okay, but just from my understanding, do we increase the testing of the outflow? I don't know.
We would
What's going through the outflow to make sure that this isn't causing an issue, environmental issue.
Correct. Now, at this point in time, I mean, the routine testing is showing we're clearly
Yeah.
still meeting the permit. So we're testing it here, and the oxidation levels in the ditch, as well as the quality of the effluent as it leaves the plant. All good things.
Okay.
So if we have to go to our improvised system, yes, there will be increased oxygen level testing, dissolved oxygen testing in the oxidation ditch itself to see if we're getting it enough in there to do, to keep the bugs working.
Yeah, thanks. I thought I heard you say that. I just kind of wanted to clarify.
Absolutely will.
Thank you.
So the other piece to all that is, this is another thing, this is the majority of what phase 3 is. It's a replacing of all of these mixers, actually with a different system. 35 years later, we have a little better system, I guess. So that's what is phase 3 it was supposed to be, or is supposed to be about. We're gonna have to spend some money this winter that we hadn't budgeted for, to go in and try to fix something with that motor and that propeller, such that it can hang on until phase 3 actually comes online and starts, in a couple of years from now. So just to keep you aware, because I know Commissioner Sharp likes to wake up in the middle of the night and worry about things. I wanted to share that. I wanted to share that with you.
All right, so thank you, Kevin. So the next thing moving forward is going back to that $3 million loan from the county. We'll put that on the agenda as a vote to allow us to borrow from the county 58% of $3 million for 10 years at 2%. Is that okay?
Well, just a question.
Sure.
And only because I'm new to this, particularly, this kind of negotiating with the county. When the word is used that the county counter-offered, I guess we're not to assume that we're into a counter-offering situation. A counter-offer means that's it.
Yeah, no question.
They're telling us that's
you have to
that's
look,
what we will do.
Yeah, I think you have to look back on the first loan of $6 million, basically saving us $1 million on something that had to be done for the plant.
Right.
And at 0%, and doing it over 10 years because they're our customer. I think the second time around, they said, hey, you know what, we gave you a pretty good deal. This is still a good deal relative, and
Yeah, I certainly
we're
wouldn't
looking
argue
at it a
that.
little bit closer.
Or the need to do this, yeah. We certainly need to do this.
Yep.
Given kind of Dick's question and Sharon's underscoring the importance of this getting done quickly, given the increase here with the, the season at peak, we're going to wait over 10 days to vote on moving forward with this? Is there a way to?
They're moving forward with their design stuff. They know it's coming. I mean, it's not like they're waiting for us to make the final decision. They're in the process of talking to
Okay, so we're not going to hold anything up by waiting until the, 21st to vote on this?
It would be great if we could say it today, but we can't.
Okay.
But they're fine with that date. We spoke with them on Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Two terms were used, like Walter Birmingham, two terms were used, oxygen and air. Are you talking about bringing in a tank truckload of oxygen? Or are you talking about forcing air externally into the tanks?
It would be an oxygen mixture. One is tapping into the existing airlines, which is just air. Okay. Right.
Significantly different.
Yep.
And the other question is, why don't you just pull the pump?
Pull the pump.
Mid-season, you're going to pull the pump then?
We're going to pull the motor.
Well, the motor's not a problem to pull.
Right. Well, there's not a pump. You have the propeller.
Okay.
Yeah.
You tell it to drive.
Correct.
Why don't you just pull it? If it fails.
In the wintertime, we will pull that, but we can't pull it now.
I thought we had redundancy still, that if one half went bad, you could use the other half. So if we're not in the 4th of July, why don't you pull it and find out what's wrong with it, see what you need to fix it.
Because we're to the point in the flow that we can't take the second ditch out of service to do that.
You have to take the whole ditch
Yeah,
out.
right. Our redundancy is we have 2 separate trains, 2 ditches. Right, you can't take half of the second one.
Is a partner in this discussion,
Who is? I'm sorry?
DNREC?
Not yet.
Don't they need to be?
Not yet.
We need to be proactive rather than reactive. They need to be a party.
We'll take care of it.
Solve it.
Kevin will take care of it.
Pardon?
Yep.
Kevin will take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
All right, we're going to move on to new business, a discussion of possible city code changes to sections, a number of different sections that Dennis is going to be going over.
Good morning, everyone. Dennis Jenny, Code Enforcement Officer. Thank you for having me on your agenda this morning. I'd like to start with what I call a bluff. It's the bottom line up front, which is these proposed changes are for changing what is currently criminal misdemeanors in the code to civil citations. The reason being, I believe, would save some time. It would actually give us more enforcement through some of these different areas. Right now, you know, if somebody's grass is 2 feet tall, I don't call the police out to try and write somebody a ticket, especially if they're living on the West Coast. It's just a waste of their time. However, I think, though, if I could send an individual like that a citation through the mail, it'll open their eyes. And this isn't, believe me, I'm not out to just start writing tickets. I consider myself to be the kindler, gentler Rehoboth Beach. I give folks plenty of violation notices and chances to correct their violations. However, we do have these flagrant repeat violators that know that, you know, nothing's going to happen, so they just keep on doing this stuff. The first area that I've got listed here is of posting signs on public property. These are mostly what I run into is either the freestanding signs, which we have worked into the code last year, that I come in on a Saturday evening or a Sunday afternoon, and these signs are just like right out in the sidewalk. And they know, they don't expect me there at that time, but they just, it's like a game to them. They'll stick them out there and nothing happens. There's nothing for me to enforce. I get realtor signs, open houses. One recent Saturday, I removed a total of 12 signs from public city right-of-way. We're talking down Rehoboth Avenue, the islands down Baird, Scarborough, and that was from 3 different realtors. And one of them, I had taken their signs before, and it's just, they knew that there was no consequences. I wasn't going to call the police out to give them tickets or anything like that. So that, I think they would get the big picture if they were to get a fine and a civil citation. Business licenses, that is another one that I spend a lot of time, I think, wasting time chasing down businesses to renew their licenses. I've got some repeat offenders that do it every year. The business license currently, which expires June 30th, I've spent until October chasing certain businesses down to get them to renew their business license. You know, I will send out a total of 3 violation notices, and that's after the city has sent them a couple reminders. So it's a lot of time spent chasing these folks down. And property maintenance, like I mentioned, tall weeds and grass, unsafe structures, issues like that. We had one house that spent over a year and a half going after them to get their violations corrected. But, you know, they just basically ignored us because there was no enforcement. So property maintenance, that's a big one. There are those repeat offenders that every year I get the complaints. I get citizens that come to me and say, listen, why can't you just ticket them? You know, it's not that easy. To me, personally, it looks bad on my part because they're complaining so often, yet it takes this long process of just sending violation after violation notice. Whereas I believe if I can just cite them and be done with it, I think we'd have better compliance in the future. And then, of course, another section on signs. One of the issues with signs is permits. All signs are required to be permitted, and it's something I've been re-educating some of the businesses. I spent a few hours last week going to them, handing out the section of the code regarding signs, and that you have a sign, you need to have permits for them. It's always been in there, but they just kind of ignore it. So bottom line, I think it's just better enforcement, saving time, and more compliance.
Dennis?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you help me with understanding this? They're currently criminal.
Correct.
So downscaling it to civil enables you how to be more effective? Because what I'm trying to get to is, I must have missed something, and you probably explained it. If they're ignoring it now and it's criminal, what makes it more effective making it civil?
What makes it more effective is they actually will get a ticket. As I mentioned, it's kind of tough to sit down with one of the chief's officers to create a summons for someone who lives out in California.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And so,
Okay.
and to me, Dennis, it's just a waste of their time when they have bigger and better things to be doing besides trying to ticket someone for tall grass. If they're repeat offenders, if I can simply just write them a $100 civil citation, I believe that future issues with that property owner will go away because they'll see that we mean business. And like I said, I'm not out to just start writing tickets at all. It's a last means for myself. So.
Well, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is if you already know who the repeat offenders are, then this would enable you to give them a civil citation each day that the violation remains in effect?
And that's true. I don't know if we'd actually go that far, but the code does allow us to do that.
Okay, but I'm coming back to, if it's a repeat violator, a repeat offender, and you already know it, you've not been here 20 years, you already know who they are.
Correct.
Then what I'm reading this to say is that the enforcement will be each day.
Correct.
And that is what you would do.
If we'd like to go that route, that is correct.
I mean, this is partly, our only mechanism to clear up some of these issues. This is not new. We brought this to the, actually, we've had several meetings with the city solicitor in my time here, Dennis's predecessor as well. And it really hadn't been changed. So we're looking to try to remedy this and have enforcement when it is needed. I mean, we have repeat offenders, and then we hear complaints and nothing's done about it, and it comes back on the city, then why aren't you doing anything? So like Dennis said, it's extremely labor intensive to have the police issue a criminal summons for someone out of state or even, within the confines of Delaware here.
Yeah, I'm in favor of how you're moving forward with this. I think because this makes it's more reasonable. My question though right now is, City Solicitor, have you reviewed what these changes he's put in place?
I've looked at what code sections they are. I'd certainly change some of the language. We use, the proposed language in some places use words like fine and punishable. A civil citation isn't a punishment. It's
right. I was just looking
civil.
through this, and I had to go online to figure out where some of these were because I wasn't familiar with the chapter numbers. So yeah, I just want to make sure if we move forward with something like this, that obviously you.
So I think these make sense. Here's a couple of things to think about. One is, as Dennis said, so many of our code provisions, if there's a violation, it's a criminal, or actually they call them a quasi-criminal violation, but it does require, for enforcement, it requires Dennis to go to a police officer and say, will you please help me out with this? Would you write a summons? He doesn't have the power to write a summons in our state justice system. He would have the power to issue a civil citation, would not need to involve law enforcement on these. The only thing I caution you about is, I can think of instances where you can really get somebody's attention if it's in the nature of a criminal violation that'll go on their criminal record versus a civil citation, which will really not show up on any record. We had an incident where an individual was not properly adhering to his rental license, and this individual had a medical practice in DC, and once he found out that he might be cited criminally, he closed down the medical practice, came and dealt with it. I don't know if it was a civil citation, whether he would have. I do think, though, that so many things we basically say we're not going to enforce it because it takes too much effort to get an officer involved, and on a grass mowing issue, do we need to take the resources of a police officer and do that? So I think the ones that are proposed here do make sense. I will work with Dennis to craft the language to make them more in the nature of a civil citation versus something that sounds like a punishment. But that's on me. I just haven't done it yet.
Go ahead. Oh, I just had two thoughts. I totally support shifting this from criminal to civil, of course. It just makes sense. I do have a concern with, the two things. One, I'll say this on every recommended change, is that somehow we phase this in, so people have a chance to know that we've changed the approach and there's different fines being assessed, et cetera. So I would really like to phase it in like we did with the last one you brought forward. So that's just one thought. The second thought is, it seems $100 X amount per day might be a bit unfair in terms of when I think about trying to get support for a gutter hanging down or something like that I can't do myself. Boy, it takes a long time to find somebody to help you with that, and particularly if you're out of state, that seems a bit onerous. So I wonder if you've thought through maybe some other options there. If anybody else, it just seems a lot, $100 a day if it's not remediated.
So that's a provision that repeats itself a lot of places throughout the code where we have civil citations, and it's common in municipalities. I don't know that I've ever seen it actually enforced that way, and here's why. If somebody challenges his citation, he's going to have to prove that he saw that violation every day. So it's going to require that every day he go out, he take a picture, he documented it, be in a file. Some way that a judge is going to say, oh yeah, he was there. It was a continuing offense every single day. And it's not enough just to say, I saw it there on Monday and then I went back on Friday and it was still there every single day. If you're going to call every day a violation, every day you have to have proof.
So why put something in if we have the opportunity to change, the approach that we know we can't enforce, or we're not going to spend his time going every day and documenting some of these. Some of them maybe we will, some of them maybe we won't.
There's some instances like when you have an unsafe structure, if we got somebody who's got tall grass, they're going to get the violation notices, the first, their second, we're to work with you if you need more time, but we need to take care of this. The third violation, final notice is, hey, you're going to get a civil citation. So it's not like we're ticking them right off the bat, but when you got an unsafe structure and you're talking, safety of folks in town here, I think something like that would be where you'd say, okay, listen, get it fixed, or you're going to be fined every day that's not. So it's just kind of more of a common sense approach when I address violations.
That makes sense to me.
I see this structure here where you're able to violate somebody on a daily basis is for the more grievous things. Because I have seen, and I know that some constituents that have had problems or whatever, and they've worked it out with building and licensing. Building and licensing is very good. You call them up and you say, hey, I got a citation, or I recognize I have a problem. It's going to take me a week to get bids to replace that sidewalk and another 2 weeks to realize it, 3 weeks out, and they work with them. I think they're great.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Leave it to the discretion of the building or the code enforcer.
But you need,
Can we say
but
at
you
the
need
discretion of, I'm sorry, can we say at the discretion of the building inspector or something? Because this leaves it open to a lot of inconsistency in practice. So where a neighbor can say, boy, you enforced it for Joe at 103 and you didn't enforce it at, for me, and or vice versa. So I wonder if there's just some language that we can have in there that does leave it to the discretion, depending on the offense. I'd just ask you to think about that, if there's a way to do that.
I think if you put that in, it becomes all of a sudden subjective, and somebody says,
It's already
"Well,
subjective."
Do it for me. Whereas this way, this is what it is, and it's his discretion.
Makes it harder to rationalize.
Can I ask just a quick different question, I think? If the fine is levied, and I'm thinking about a repeat offender who ignores us now, I don't know why they wouldn't ignore us in the future. So eventually, what happens? What happens?
So right now, if they ignore us, so Dennis can only send a letter right now, basically saying there's a provision, you're violating it, and unless he gets a summons, he's unable to send a letter that has any real teeth in it, I guess is a frank way of saying it. Now he'll at least be able to say, you're not just getting a letter, you're getting a civil penalty issued to you, and please pay up. So that's one step further.
Yes.
If they don't pay up, then you go to a judge and say, I'd like my citation enforced, and the judge can say, prove to me that they violated it. That's when he'll get his file out and say, their location at this date and time, here's the photograph, here's the citation, and the judge will say, psh, pay the civil citation.
And that's where the piece comes in, that if you happen to have the documentation that you cited this 3 times,
Right.
that's what differentiates it from anything else.
That's right.
Okay,
Right.
I got it.
And he's great at keeping good documents of everything he cites and sees.
Thank you.
I have another question. The sections on signs, license required, and property maintenance, to me, are pretty straightforward. But when you get down to the zoning, I'm not sure where we're going with that or how. I need examples.
Well, the only section you have, I think, Dennis, that's in zoning is 270-69, which is just the article that deals with signs, right?
Correct.
So the civil
that's the
citation.
Yeah, just
Signs.
signs, yes.
Okay, that's what I didn't know. All right, thank you. Oh.
Chief, did you want to say something?
No, I thought there may be some discussion on how we have to go and do warrants or accept citation. But we are, the police department's all in favor of this.
Makes more efficient use of everybody's time, I think.
Yeah.
All right,
Dennis, under Chapter 120 businesses, the second item there, you mentioned something about expired licenses, I believe, and that you give them a monetary penalty. Why wouldn't you just cancel their license and that's it? I think it would be resolved the next day.
Well, their license is canceled basically because it expired. So I did have an instance last year where like I said, the city had sent the business 2 reminders prior to June. They didn't renew their license, so I had sent them a total of 3 violation notices. And at that point, it was basically, I got 2 officers to go down to the business and we closed them down. We didn't write anybody tickets, nobody got summons. It's just the workers there. So we couldn't fault them because the business owner is the one who's responsible, who's getting all the notices. So it's, they're basically, if their license expires,
But do you treat them as if their license is expired and they can't open their doors?
that's something that it would be up for discussion. In the past, I've been reluctant to do that. But if they're going to continue to operate after numerous notices, then we should be able to just close them down.
I mean, there probably likely ought to be a grace period. However, it's after a certain period of time, whether it's a week or a month or something, then cut the bait. That's it.
Well, and I would imagine if, with your situation that you just enumerated, that I'm sure the workers got in touch with the business license owner and maybe contacted you about it.
Correct.
You know, because conceivably, he could show up the next day, and if they're open, they could close them again, and
Yeah, and I explained,
in essence,
yeah,
their license is gone.
in that instance, we just explained to the workers that if you come back here tomorrow and open up, then you will then be given a ticket because you've been put on notice, so.
I think the important point is we treat it on a case-by-case basis and try to
Correct.
stay as friendly as possible.
Absolutely.
Sure.
So I guess moving forward, you can work with Dennis on this, Glenn, and get some language together. And
Yes.
do you think maybe you can have it ready for
This
a
is-
possible vote on the 21st?
Yes, this is not that extensive, I can have it ready. Yeah.
All right, and we'll put that on there for a vote on the 21st with those adjustments.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you,
It would
Dennis.
be
Thank you.
easier to create a red line version, I think, for us to understand, but in particular for the public to understand if there was a red line version of.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Dennis.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right, we're going to move right on to B, which is discussion of additional no smoking areas within city limits. Commissioner Byrne had asked to bring this up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've mentioned this a couple of times over the last several months. And so the discussion this morning is to expand the smoking ban, or in other words, to extend the smoking-free areas to several areas that are not currently included. I think it was 2014 where Commissioner Mills and others gave leadership to the smoking ban in places like Grove Park, Lake Gerard, Central Park, areas along Country Club Estates, Deer Park, the boardwalk, the beach, et cetera. And so what I would like is some discussion for us to consider expanding the no smoking zone to the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Bank, both south and north of Rehoboth Avenue. I think it was mentioned this morning in the discussion regarding the new proposed Canal Park, that that having that as a no smoking zone would be appropriate. So again, the Lewis Rehoboth Canal Bank, both south and north of the of Rehoboth Avenue, the new Steve Elkins Way, to include that, and then much of the City Hall campus. So that would include the City Hall, the Convention Center, Parking Department, and Communications buildings, and the surrounding grounds to become smoke-free. However, to be fair to particularly the employees who are smokers, we would want to give some consideration to those folks, and therefore have a designated smoking area that can be used in. If I could ask the city manager to comment on that. She's given some thought to this. I think she's had some discussion with employees and others in terms of what might best work for everyone.
Yes, and thank you, Commissioner. You know, we discussed this, I discussed this 4 years ago now with Commissioner Mills when he first brought up the areas for no smoking that we have in place today. Of course, the City Hall wasn't yet constructed, but now that it is, one of the areas was the section of the Convention Center parking lot in the back by the 3rd Street that goes to Bad Hair Day. So there's a area on city property that could be used for that. And then the flip side of that is possibly on the driveway itself where the loading dock is to the Convention Center. Across from that, if you look at the, if you can envision the generator to the left of that there's a grassy area there that could be used for a smoking section. It's not certainly right in where the generator is, but it's a grassy spot to the left of that. So if this moves forward, I think, you know, a spot needs to be identified and will be identified for further clarity.
Right. Thank you. So before we get into discussion, let me just comment a little bit on what has really triggered this for me, and that is that I live along the canal and I walk my dog once or twice a day along portions of the canal and into Grove Park and along the canal, both on the north and south side of Rehoboth Avenue. We have city benches and picnic tables along those areas, so it's inviting for people to sit there, enjoy the canal. We have a hotel on the south side of Rehoboth Avenue where there's a number of folks that come into town and they utilize right across the street in front of them the benches, the picnic table, and invariably, day in and day out, those areas are covered with cigarette butts. What happens to the cigarette butts is, depending on which way the rain comes down and the wind blows, they either wash into the canal or they go into the street and then right down into our stormwater system. And increasingly, from an environmental point of view, we're learning how bad the cigarette butts are to go into our natural environment. It's like anything else. It is not a natural product. That does not break down except over long, long periods of time. And because we have done this, and I think we've done it very successfully on the beach, the boardwalk, and most of our park areas, the tot lot areas, and so on, it just seems that these are areas that should be added to the existing smoke-free areas in our city. So,
So-
open it to discussion.
So just a quick question. On the canal bank, are you suggesting that there's a designated area or just a no smoking?
I would suggest no smoking. Isn't that how we're dealing with the parks? If we go into other parts of Grove Park or the other parks?
Well, that was my follow-up question. I can't quite remember why we didn't, or if we had a discussion when this was first passed for the current ban on smoking. If it applied to all city parks, and if the canal bank could be designated as a city park and any other similar location, wouldn't it just be more evenly?
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Commissioner Mills?
Let me give you a little history. First, I want to recognize that Commissioner Cluzy, back before this session, worked with me, and we co-sponsored the first no smoking bill, and that was implementing it in Grove Park alone, I believe. And you're right, Grove Park had no designated smoking areas at all. And I believe the way that we couched that area was the entirety of the canal side area between the museum and the bridge and the canal bank, and the entirety of the park, but for the parking areas. So the parking area at Grove Park was a designated, or not a designated, it was okay to smoke there. So before I go further, I want to say that yes, we need to look at the language to make sure, if we're going to go that route, to make sure that there's no smoking on the new canal side access area, but it may well be covered in there now. But it may need clarity, and that would be fine. So after Pat left office, I think a couple of years went by, and I sponsored expansion to the entirety of the bandstand area, which again has no designated smoking areas, but at the boundaries to where you can smoke and can't smoke, there are no smoking signs as well as no smoking butt tenders. Then we expanded no smoking to the entirety of the boardwalk, which again has smoke to butt tenders at the entrances and boundaries of the boardwalk, no smoking areas, but not designated areas. And then the beach and the beach, those are the only ones that have designated smoking areas. Every X number of feet, they're seasonal. They have to be co-located with a sign and a cigarette butt manager, whatever you call it. And I think at that time, we probably added all the other parks also. So like Girard Park in entirety, Cranberry Park. But again, none of those parks have designated smoking areas. So that's a little history there. Obviously, I'm a fan of providing no smoking areas, but I've also been very consistent in that I think we need to provide designated smoking areas for certain things. Makes it more palatable for the public members, and I think it's right for our employees. And Sharon's right, as we designed the city hall, we designed an area big enough back there. I always thought that there ought to be a pavilion there to accommodate people in the weather or getting out of the weather to be able to stand, especially because if you adopted no smoking on the city campus, then that's more than employees. It's members of your general public, but it's also your patrons to your convention hall areas there. So covered pavilions or roofed, something roofed. I'm also reminded that I believe as of 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, all state campuses, state public areas on campuses are all no smoking, which includes the entirety of the campus, the sidewalks, the parking areas. And I know I've seen some of them, maybe it's more private industry rather than state office campuses, but some of them say no smoking within X feet of an entrance, so that if they allow smoking, and again, I think that's more private business, that at least they're not, people aren't congregated near public entries into the building. So, so in terms of coming full circle, Tony, back to your question about designated areas on the canal bank, I would say not. And I don't know if you can recall, Jennifer Duncan wrote us a note not too long ago about concerns about putting the smoke butt tenders, whatever those things are called, where you put out your cigarette in a park. Her concern has always been from day one when we installed them originally 5 years ago, was concerned that if people are going to congregate around there and smoke until the cigarette's gone and put it out, that there's potentially a likelihood of that cigarette causing a fire in that vicinity. And I think over the 5 years we've been doing that with no smoking signs and smoking butt tenders at Deer Park, Cranberry Park, in the different trailheads for Central Park. I don't think we've ever had a problem with fires. So I'm overall
Yeah,
supportive.
one thing to add historically, I don't know, Stan, if you remember this, south of the bridge towards where you live, at one time, we had proposed a raised boardwalk type of situation. The Lovitts had $10,000 that they were going to contribute to any type of improvement if we did it within a certain time frame, which we did not. But my question on that whole area is that all our property? I mean, can we in fact, make regulations or install?
In other words,
tenders?
is a portion of it, is likely owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. Why I would say that is because based on the other side,
Right.
the Army Corps of Engineers owns the land in the canal bank from the water up to
It's, I think it's 12 feet.
almost up to the corner of the Main Street building and everything.
Okay.
And I believe that's
Well,
true.
So
Glenn,
could we designate this as a park and maintain it in such a way that it is clear that it is a park that
Well, we
belongs
are
to the city?
maintaining it now. I mean, not only the park benches and picnic tables, but the city is responsible for mowing that, picking up sticks, the fallen logs. We've been responsible for taking out dead trees.
Kevin might have something to add to that.
Just because it came up in another question that the commissioner had asked some time ago when we were out at the site about the maintenance of the banks and who owns the banks and that kind of thing. So I called the Corps not too long ago, talked to the project manager for that project. He says, we own the land. They have an easement for that, but they regulate it. That they only really operate and maintain the canal itself, which used to be the old channel, I guess. But that anything to do with the banks that we own, they regulate. So specifically, we were asking about the bank caving that was going on. They're going, it's not our problem. That's your own problem because you own the banks. So I would presume with that philosophy, you'd go get a permit, say we wanted to put a boardwalk across that whole thing. We could very easily do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
so all we'd have to do is put up signs. Is there forgive me, is there a list in the code about where the no smoking areas are?
Yeah, oh, there's a whole chapter
That's
on
detailed.
So
smoking, yes.
all we'd have to do would be to just insert the Canal Side Park south of Rehoboth Avenue.
That would be very easy and probably one line if you want, but Dick also proposes Steve Elkins Way.
Oh, no, I'm
And
just
then
saying
if
for
you
that
go-
park.
And then if you go for the city campus, that's a little more extensive, because if you can imagine, the boundary meanders all the way around. And within that area, I would think you do want to have designated no smoking areas. So it's a little more complicated, but it's,
Right, oh, I think to be fair to
laws.
the, particularly the employees that are in this building, that are our employees.
So maybe
Right.
Commissioner Byrne, you can work with the city manager to figure something out on the City Hall campus.
I'd be happy to work with the manager and the solicitor, and hopefully we can take the current ordinance and add,
Amendments to it.
right. Does that make sense, Glenn?
It does, yes.
Does anybody know off the top of their head what happens over at 306 relevant to smoking? I don't know it, I'm sorry.
I don't know that any of them smoke.
Well,
I've
yeah.
never seen them smoke, but
We have a receptacle outside there. I do
So
know
it
that.
is, in essence, a smoking area? Yeah, okay.
I guess, if anyone smokes, yeah.
I don't know if that's what you want, but.
Chief, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm not sure if it's appropriate or not, but while we're talking about smoking, and if we're having to revisit the smoking ordinance and make some changes, if not, it may have to be brought up on topic another time. But one of the sections that we've been concerned with at the police department, as stated, the smoking ban actually went into effect back in 2011, 2014 it was amended, and 15 to add on about parks and things. Concern we have is under 224-4B, it says any person violating any of the provisions of this chapter who has been issued a written warning or has been cited hereunder within the preceding 4 months shall be cited as provided in chapter 126. I think by saying we have to still continue to give a written warning when, we see people at the boardwalk and we ask them just, to get off the boardwalk, we tell them where the designated spots are. The law's been on the books long enough, and all the other beach towns all have enacted it, that people realize you can't smoke, on the boardwalk and beach area. I'm not sure why that provision's still there. We're still going to continue to give warnings, but, what happens is we have to see a person one day, we're just giving a verbal warning, another day, they have to do it again. We have to recognize, the same officer has to recognize that group of, that individual again, give them a written warning before you can ever do something again. And that really hinders us, quite honestly, in the park areas. And we mentioned earlier, if we have someone that's over there every morning or whatever. So again, I think the officers understand common sense and trying to give people warning, but at the same time, we need that tool to go ahead and just give the civil citation if that's the case, to move forward instead of all the written warnings and documentations. Just some food for thought for that. And I would add, I'm very much in favor of Steve Elkins' way to be non-smoking, but somehow we definitely gonna have to coordinate that because people see that as a sidewalk and they can walk the rest of the way on the sidewalk down Rehoboth Avenue, and it's hard to distinguish that. But again, so we'd have to be hard to regulate, I guess, for my officers at times. I just want to point that out, but we definitely could, I guess, use that as an extension of the City Hall complex. So just food for thought.
With the city solicitor on maybe making that amendment that you're thinking about on 124?
Yes, and Glenn's already aware of it, but yes, I'll be glad to. Thank you.
224-4B?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, we can move right along to C, which is a brief discussion of the most recent parking garage task force meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. The second meeting of the task force was held this past Friday. It sounds like the recommended approach from the group is to come up with long and short-term objectives and solutions, make the the key to this, aesthetically pleasing, and outline those objectives, bring forward at the next Parking Task Force meeting, at which time the task force would recommend a vote or not a vote for a parking garage to the Board of Commissioners. So it's still in process. I know that the thought of a RFP and an RFQ was discussed, and most members thought that it was necessary to do both an RFQ and an RFP. Of course, one differentiates from the other in that the request for qualifications helps narrow down the choices, and then the RFP is more of a detailed tool for what is exactly needed and what is wanted. So both of these would be non-binding, an RFQ and an RFP, but as far as going ahead and moving ahead with this, the task force is looking again for those objectives, an outline of those objectives at the next meeting.
I think, Sharon, the group also just wanted to get kind of a general consensus from the commissioners today that this is the approach we want to take. So I just wanted to see if we had a general consensus that we did want to kind of solicit some ideas and, non-binding ideas through an RFP or SOO or some sort of process. So, Steve, you were at the meeting as well. So that's what I understand from the group in addition to what you said.
Yeah, with the focus on information gathering. And so it's, I think a lot of the people that are participating in that committee recognize that some of the best insights that we can get are from people who do this. And so I think the emphasis should be on that anything that we do is non-binding so that people understand that this isn't, that there's a definite decision being made, but that this is still part of the due diligence process to see what is feasible. And I think it's important that we continue to emphasize that. And so, it's not, it is what it is, which is to gather information and not to make a firm commitment.
I guess where I thought we were going was, where that committee might be going would be to evaluate the need for the garage first and come up with a definitive yes before going forward for it. Your explanation, I think, is helpful, but I guess, I was expecting more of a, hey, we've debated it and we've decided it's good for these reasons to move forward and bad for these reasons.
And I think part of this information gathering will make us better informed to do exactly what you're saying.
So, City Manager, when you were just talking about the group wants to look at long and short-term solutions, I think I got lost in exactly what that was, because where I thought we might be going was to take another look, and maybe this is under the purview of the parking committee, to take another look at all of those recommendations that we didn't enact, to work that in the short term and on a parallel track with the evaluation of a parking garage. Am I making any sense?
I think I understand what you're talking about, but the chair of the parking committee is a member of the task force.
Yes.
That did not come up at the meeting, as far as what the commissioners acted on based on the recommendations from the parking committee. What was discussed was, the fact that we have a 100 parking spot facility now that is underutilized or not utilized all the time, and what would an additional 200 parking spots mean to that? So, you know, that would all come out in the request for proposal when the folks that do this for a living would come back to us and then be able to define some of that more succinctly. So short and long-term goals that could be incorporated in the process and the recommendation possibly to bring back to the commissioners were not yet defined.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I'd like to get something off my chest. I call it a little housekeeping, and so that I can move forward with this and end with some recommendations. I just want to go back very briefly to the process for forming this committee. If you recall, the parking committee sent us a note in April saying that they recommended that this body form a parking garage task force. And if you recall, at the April regular meeting, Commissioner Schlosser brought that up, made recommendation that she would look into it and bring some recommendations forward on how to form it. At one point, discussion went a little too far, I thought, and I mentioned that I thought that we should stop talking about it and put it on the May workshop meeting for the full Board of Commissioners to talk about it. And at that point, the audio, transcripts that I made of it show that the mayor agreed to put it on the May workshop, and Commissioner Calusi said okay, and Commissioner Schlosser said that's fine also. So I have to tell you, I'm extremely disappointed that we didn't go through that process, and instead with lightning speed after that meeting when we agreed to bring it up in the May workshop meeting to discuss it again, that the committee was formed in private. It's certainly out of my eyes. Maybe it was, maybe everybody else had input in it, but I have yet to have input. And frankly, I think I'm owed an apology as well as the other commissioners that never got input on that committee. And I think that the public is owed an apology also for the lack of transparency in forming that committee, but also for their lack of opportunity to be able to apply for that committee. So there you go. Now, recommendations going forward, since I do not know all the people, and believe me, this is not a comment on the members on there at all. I know some of them, and they're fine people. This was a comment about the process. Going forward, since I don't know the people, and I know a lot of my constituents don't know the members on there, and somehow we short-circuited the application process, I would recommend that applications be filled out and/or at least a mini bio made of the members, and that can be scanned into one document and be put online on our legislative portal so that the public has the opportunity, and the public and myself have the opportunity to go and read and see who indeed are these people on our committees. And as far as all the comments I just made, everyone is also applicable to the Utility Rate Study Committee also, and I think that they should fill out the application and have their bios or whatever, the application online available. And beyond that, for a different topic, the same thing for all our committees. I think that the public deserves the opportunity to know who is on our committees. And I would like to see us give consideration that on the legislative portal, every committee, commission, and board has one button you can push so you can learn who indeed are these members on there. Thank you.
Well, I want to come back to a question that I thought was a key question asked. I think it was by Commissioner Schlosser a few minutes ago. That was, is there some general consensus here to move this ahead? And I think going through this RFQ process that Steve outlined is key to continue to gather information, and particularly if we can get some outsiders to feed some key kinds of information into us. So we're not, I don't want to be accused of operating and thinking about this in a bubble, but to have others from outside with experiences about our size of a community, what the pros and cons are, and to really give us ideas to move this thinking ahead in one way or another. I think that's critical.
I support that as well, because we have nothing to lose but learning more, like getting more information.
Yeah, I think the information gathering process is very important. This isn't an issue that came up yesterday. This is an issue that's been on the city's docket for over 20 years. You know, it came up when we were looking at the City Hall complex campus 10-plus years ago. Then it kind of fell by the wayside again. It's come up recently through the parking committee. Recommendations, that was one of their recommendations, to look into a parking garage. You know, my feeling is through these RFQs and then maybe even the RFP process, we'll find out from input from professionals, you know, whether it's a viable project, whether we need it. I don't know of many people in town that say we don't have a parking issue. And having more parking spaces in the downtown commercial area rather than out in the residential area may make some sense. It may be a good thing because everybody's talking about employees parking in front of my house, and why don't they park downtown? So, I mean, I think conceptually it's something to gather information about. If we find out at some point in time down the road that, you know, this isn't what we want, we just say, thank you, no. But we have information. And I think getting information from professionals would be very important, and this is a freebie if we, you know, go through the RFQ and RFP process. Anybody else?
I don't have any problem with RFQs. I just want to make sure. I was under the impression, and others have more experience than I in procurement, I was under the impression an RFP has a bit more substance and scope to it than an RFI does. So are we looking in the short term for both, or starting with what?
The RFQ.
The RFQ.
The RFQ is for the qualifications, you know, to go out and say, hey, we're looking for somebody to give us ideas. And then all of a sudden you start, you know, drilling it down. Maybe there's 3 people out there that look like, you know, are qualified. Then at that point in time, we start to put in our ideas of what's necessary and give them that for a proposal.
Let me clarify that just a little bit, Mayor. I think you're right, but, and Sharon and Steve jump in, but what the groups talked about is almost a combination, really. The current modern practice in doing this is, you know, to go out with a statement of objectives, where you basically say, you know, we're collecting information, we'd like to know folks that have experience in performing this type of project and how you would go about doing it in our particular circumstance. So that's more what this is. But please, Steve or Sharon,
But this is, I'm really glad you said that, because this is what I want to tease out. That the way Commissioner Slosser just described it, it sounds like to me that we're asking for folks who would be interested in constructing the project, unless I misheard. And to me, that's a bit, it gives the impression, in my thinking, that to our community, that decisions have already been made.
Yeah,
So what I'm trying to hear is that we would not necessarily be going to folks who could construct it, but maybe it's in the finessing of the words, going to folks who might give us a broad view and could explain to Commissioner Mills' question, is this the appropriate solution to our problem?
Well, okay, this is my view of this. The people who are going to respond to this are people who are in this business. They're not going to be people who look at this in a broad-based way. I don't think, hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
So what I think we're asking for is Okay, companies are out there. Give us some, do you think this is a good idea? If you do think it's a good idea, give us your ideas in terms of what this looks like. We're not necessarily asking for a specific proposal for a specific looking garage or whatever, but they could say, you know, these are the kinds of things that we as a company would like to provide you. So it's qualifications plus some sort of ideas of what would make sense for our municipality.
Well, and that's the nuance, I think, of Commissioner Schlosser's explanation that helps me, that it's all in the language that we put around the objectives of what this is all about. Because if you only send it and ask companies who do this kind of work, why wouldn't they immediately say, your solution is the parking garage? That's my only point.
Right.
Well,
it may
what are
very
we
well
looking
be
for?
the people who all answer this say you need a parking garage,
Right.
but some people may say, well, you really only need 200 spaces. Somebody might say you need 300 spaces. Somebody might say the mobility center is the answer. No, you need retail there. No, this is not the right place. You know, there's a bunch of different things that could come out of this.
And I agree with you on all of that. Where does the answer come to the question, is this what's needed to effectively solve our issue?
Well, and I think that's part of what they're going to supply. I mean, they're not going to just totally open-end it. I don't think they would say, well, if we were going to do a project like this, we would recommend the following, things, 5 things for your municipality, okay? They're not going to answer it so broadly that it doesn't give us an idea of what's possible and whether or not, from our standpoint, I mean, in the final analysis, we make the decision. But we make the decision based on the data that's given to us. And the
Right,
only
but you
data
can-
we can get is people coming up with these professionals giving us their ideas, right?
Well, I think there's a huge nuance in that too, because you can craft an entire initiative so that the outcome already supports the going-in position. What I'm just trying to tease out is, and to me, it's for the good of the community, and I don't care where it comes from, that the question is really what I've already stated. Is this the best solution to our problem? And what I have such a hard time getting past, and it's embedded in the inability to pass changes to our current parking situation. But almost if we could do both simultaneously to all those recommendations that we got from the parking committee, it would make so much more sense to me. And maybe I'm not articulating it very elegantly.
No, I think you are. And I think, all of these terms that we throw around, request for qualifications, request for proposal, they're all terms of art that all have specific meanings.
Yes.
And so your point is, be careful what we ask for. And so what we're talking about is more of a kind of identifying what our general requirements are, which is, we want improvements to traffic flow. We want improvements to parking. We want it to be aesthetically, whatever it is, it's got to match the aesthetics of our downtown area. And come up with a very, this is going to sound strange, very general but specific criteria that we have that goes beyond build us a parking garage. And so that's why, hey, we may get crappy responses, pardon my French, but we don't know. And so I think right now, we don't know enough to answer the $64,000 question that Commissioner Mills asked. And so part of this process is to take people with varied backgrounds that are all complementary to looking at this overall challenge that we face, which is traffic flow and parking, and see if we can gather information from people who happen to have experience in building parking garages that meet a lot of these things. And so it's up to us to have the discipline and the smarts and the transparency with the community to do the right thing. But to me, this is all part of that process where we're trying to get smarter and trying to get smarter as quickly as we can so that we can fully vet out what the right options are going forward.
Steve, for me, one of the things you just said is really key, part of the process. And I think this task force is carrying a heavy responsibility and is really challenged to convince our community of what direction to go. And so part of the process is gathering this information. The RFQ, or whatever we want to call it, is not an end-all.
No.
It's a
step in the process.
Yeah, and to go to Commissioner Sharp's point, as I said earlier this past year, as we made some parking changes, some, but not all, of the parking committee's recommendations, and they were upset that we didn't do them all. As at that point in time, I said, these are things, parking is going to be something that we focus on the next 3 to 5 years. I don't see a parking garage happening within 3 years. Maybe it's 2.5 years we have something in our face. But I do see over the next 3 to 5 years making significant parking changes. The parking garage may be one of them. Putting more angled-in parking may be another one. Having less 30-minute meters. There's a lot of things on their list that I think we will continue, hopefully they're focused on, and we'll continue to look at over time. And I think with that in mind, we may find as we get further along, there's less of a need. Or we may find absolutely there's a need. Let's do it as soon as possible. I mean, as I said before, the parking garage situation, the discussion has been going off and on, mostly off, for the last 15, 20 years. And, what I've heard from a variety of people has been very positive since this came up in the last year or so, that the parking committee talked about it, and then it was in the newspaper, and it's been very positive. But the big concern is who's paying for it? Well, I guarantee you, if we can come up with somebody that's paying for it, people's minds are going to be changing. And so some of that we won't know until we get these more information and stuff. And, there are things that they may be able to suggest above and beyond the parking garage that these people do from a parking perspective. And so I think information is going to be good. This isn't something, just because we've got this task force talking about it now, I really think it's a ways down the road, construction-wise. I mean, we just did this parking lot. We want to take advantage of it. And as many people have mentioned, you go out there on a Saturday and there's plenty of parking spaces, but no one knows it's there. And I think a parking garage is a good possibility to move traffic around, move parking around, much as we've been trying to talk about that's what we want to do. We want to create more spaces and make the experience better. Could this help the experience?
The point is, we're not starting with the answer that we want and then trying to justify that. We're looking at the situation as it is, the evolving challenges that we may face, depending on the other things that we do that are complementary to attracting more people into Rehoboth Beach. And so this is part of that overall planning for the future of what we may end up being 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But I, in my prior life before retiring, I spent a lot of time working through a process like this to gather information from experts in the field who are competitors, and so they have a vested interest. It's an attractive enough project, and it may be a bust, I don't know. But it's going to be a bust when we've invested nothing rather than a bust after we've invested millions of dollars.
Well, and I don't question any of the good intention that I hear. I would just love to be able to have been part of a vote where we changed the parking on King Charles and created maybe 50 additional spots, if that were the the outcome.
It's too late to put a petition in.
I know. But we didn't do that.
No, for you.
Oh,
You
it
would
is,
like
ju-
to be part
that's
of
what
the
I
vote,
mean.
because
I would
think that
have,
vote will be taking place soon.
excellent, because I would have
Oh, no.
loved to have done that because we didn't have it happen for this season.
But again,
Yeah.
I mean, parking is 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
We did a lot this year, and I think we did a little bit last year, and I think we've got more to do over the next 3 or 4 years. That's definitely one that's on my radar.
Yeah.
But we did indicate we wanted to do a survey to see how many we thought
Yeah,
might be gained by it.
absolutely. So it's information gathering.
And I have no problem with information that gives us more solid answers to the questions that I know everybody has on their mind.
Yes, please.
To bring in 123 on Open Avenue. Not being critical of the agenda, but I was thinking the agenda when I saw it, that you were looking for request for proposals to build a new building. That was my fault. But now split up request for proposals for plans, ideas, or a separate one for the building. But I think the first thing Canal Dock comes up today is a perfect example. What are the parameters, the limits, the boundaries that you would propose for the parking garage if it's out here? Because when you need to draw the lines, I heard you make mention about contacting the fire company, but you need to know anybody that's going to come in with proposals needs to have an idea where are the boundaries. I think that's the very first thing that you need to be agreeing on. No disrespect, you approved $20,000 for the canal dock, and you're still fighting, wrong word, but haven't voted for it. And you need to make the decision, where do you propose to put it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, move on to the next thing. The last item on our new business, discussion of future path forward regarding public restrooms. Commissioner Mills, you asked to speak a little bit further about the
Well,
restrooms.
I think Commissioner Sharp also suggested we put this on the agenda after the last discussion when I reported that, what was it, about 3 weeks ago, the brand-new gorgeous restrooms had been vandalized with graffiti in the men's room, 4 stalls at the Baltimore Avenue restroom. And at that time, I had questioned the city manager on the restroom attendance. My recollection from the Boardwalk and Beach Committee is that we made recommendation that the public restrooms should be attended full-time by separate attendees. In other words, 3 women, 1 in each of the 3 public restrooms on the boardwalk, and also 3 men, 1 in each of the 3 public restrooms on the boardwalk. And I had no recollection, but Sharon's answer was that during the budget talks, we apparently talked about it and dropped the men off there. I don't recall that, but regardless, having seen the graffiti, that obviously was going to take some work to prime over and seal and then repaint and everything, that was just unacceptable. And so I brought it up last time, and Tony suggested that, well, let's put it on the agenda for further discussion. I would hope that we could find the money to put male attendants in the restrooms. If you recall, somebody also stood up last time and said something about putting cameras outside the restrooms. And I think that's a good idea, but I think that would be needed to augment the full-time attendance in each public restroom, men's and women's, during the peak season time, so.
Well, I think we dropped it when we talked about it at the budget period because it was somewhere a number approaching $100,000, which to me seems pretty substantial. You know, I had talked to the chief banks, and you know, my thoughts were the possibility of hooking up closed-circuit TV cameras outside to have an idea of, you know, what type of people are going in. If we see some kind of graffiti, we have certain dates we can look back on the tapes. I don't know enough about the technology, but You know, I frequent the boardwalk a lot and try to on the weekends. And even on the busy days, I would think that the attendance would be sitting in there, with the exception of an hour or two in the afternoon, would be sitting in there and doing pretty much nothing. And I just don't know if that would be the best use of our monies or their time. But I don't know enough about that. But I would think that cameras could do something. I think the bathrooms are beautiful. The last 3 weekends, I've had a lot of public comments about them on a positive side. And, you know, I didn't notice the graffiti in the Baltimore, and maybe I think it's been painted over or whatever. But I think having full-time attendance would be very costly, and I just don't know what it would serve.
Well, and I don't know what the solution is. I'm always astounded that these things happen, but they do from a graffiti standpoint. And maybe it would just be good for us to keep track, and I'm sure we will, of how many times we're going to do this, because we can't have it looking that way. It was a substantial investment, and I know we all want it to remain so, and be aesthetically perfect. So if the attendants are a bridge too far, where's the middle for us? And I don't know. You know, maybe it's just continued monitoring of that this summer. Maybe it's asking the chief if there can be a little bit more presence in those areas, but I don't know how, you know, I don't know how thin folks are spread, but it's a concern from the standpoint of, are we being penny wise and pound foolish when it comes to protecting our investments? And I don't know what the solution is.
I have to say that my experience traveling anywhere in this country, you know, if someone is bound and determined to do the graffiti, they're going to do it because that's what they do. And I don't think it's just somebody who just kind of had the idea. I think these are the people who do this all the time. And I think to catch them, I think it might even be difficult with an attendant.
Well, that's probably part of the game.
Yeah.
Of
So
evading
I kind of think it could be a huge waste of money. $100,000 is a lot of money to spend. I don't know what it takes to repaint. Not that we want to be repainting all the time, but I just don't think it's going to be as effective as we would like it to be.
And if I may just add, I believe the number was more like 70,000, 80,000 for a female and a male attendant in each of the 3 restrooms, in addition to what we already have now, what we implemented on Rehoboth Avenue, which I think seems to be working well. The graffiti was painted over. I'm not sure what condition or the improved condition, what that looks like, but it was immediately taken care of. And we haven't had any other incidents from what my understanding is.
Are these tile walls or what? Brick tile walls?
Painted cinder block.
Any other questions?
So I didn't understand the figure there. We have 3 women attendants, 1 in each of the public restrooms. You indicated 70 to 80,000. Is that just for the three additional men?
No, that was for both, 1 male and 1 female
So
in
how
each.
much for 3 additional men?
Well, it wasn't broken down that way. If I can pull it up, I'll try to find it. But my recollection, again, is the total for 3 additional women and 3 additional men, so they could have them 7 days a week, was $70,000 to $80,000.
Let's say that's 80, divide that in 2, because we just need the men, that's less than 40,000 a year.
But what about the women?
We already have women in there.
We have women only in the Rehoboth Avenue restroom.
Not Baltimore and not Delaware?
Correct.
I,
Never had that.
I must have been out at the restroom or something, using the restroom at the time at the budget hearing, because I would not have supported that, but if it is, that's what it is, that's what it is.
Any further input? All right. Well, as we get into the budget session next year, these are things we should probably be thinking about. But I think also there are some things to think about, further work that we need to do on the restrooms. Some of the things that the Boardwalk and Beach Committee had suggested that maybe in a phase 2, especially on Baltimore Avenue, but that's obviously something for the budget sessions next year. Move right into commissioner comments. A couple things I'm going to put on the next agenda. There's going to be 2 new members of the Bandstand Committee, so we'll take a vote on that. Also, the accommodations tax implementation was passed by both the House and the Senate for the city of Rehoboth. So at some point during the summer, we'll have to decide on if and what type of percentage that we want to put into that accommodations tax. We had already talked about it, implementing it by January 1st, and I would think that's what we should focus on. Simultaneously, the county is also doing the same thing. They will be probably in front of the House this week, and their hope is to, this is Sussex County, their hope is to also be able to implement up to a 3% tax on hotels in unincorporated areas in the county. I think this, through the discussions that I've had with some of the hotel people, one of the big things that they had complaints about is if we implement some type of a accommodations tax, then they're putting themselves in a position, or we're putting them in a position to not be on equal footing with hotels right outside of town. However, I would think this will put them on the same grounds as ours, so it makes it a little bit easier as we have our discussions as we move forward on what type of number we put on there. And one of the interesting things with the county, and it's something we may want to consider, is they're putting earmarks on the monies towards beach replenishment, towards dredging, towards various different water issues within the county, and it may be something that we discuss as we move forward. But that's out there, and probably will go in front of the House either this week or next week for by June 30th passing.
The county, for me, has always been a good partner, and I think in part what that bill shows is the value they put on our beaches, and that they're going to be devoting some of that money to beach replenishment that benefits us directly, of course, but it benefits the entire state and the county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. Any other commissioner comments? If not, future meetings. There was a rate study meeting, or for this rate study, people were going to present to us on June 12th. That meeting has been canceled. And they're looking at June 27th at 9 a.m. They're just trying to cross the T's and dot the I's with the group that's in that committee. And
I passed a note on to Sharon when she changed the date. I'd like to see us confirm it ASAP so that we can get public notice out, because at this point, we give people almost 2 weeks' notice to that meeting, rather than waiting to the 7-day notice period. I would rather give people plenty of notice.
Yeah, I think it's some of those people are traveling that are on the committee. And as soon as Sharon has that, she'll put something out. And then our regular meeting is on the 21st at 3 o'clock. And if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
And within 5 minutes, we